Tonight, a loving father and major real estate developer killed when his car explodes.
A pipe bomb designed to obliterate everything. But could a fresh look at DNA change what we know about the case? An all-new 2020 starts right now.
When they killed Gary, they killed Gary.
I still can see it when I close my eyes.
This windshield pops off the car and goes how many feet?
400 feet. I'm the killer. I got my gym bag, which fits in the country club scenario. Open the door, put it down, close the door. I walk away.
It is one of the most notorious murders in Tucson history.
He was a wonderful father. He was a true gentleman and a true kind person.
They rubbed shoulders with people in high society.
Everybody thought car bombing has to be a mob hit. Very spectacular. We're sending a message.
Turns out, according to some, who didn't want him dead? A long list of persons of interest, an ex-girlfriend, an ex-wife, ex-business associates.
It was pure obsession. His hatred was pure obsession.
And we're going to reenact the bombing.
Everybody's under.
To see how it could have been done.
2, 1.
Now we're starting to pick up some heavy components.
That you can take what seems like a scene of classic chaos and create any kind of order out of it is remarkable to us. So what specifically did you find as you looked at all that evidence?
And it was titled To Kill. And right at the top of the list was Gary Treno.
Welcome to Tucson, Arizona, or even on a sweet golf course like this one. The triple-digit temperatures and the blue skies above can transform in an instant.
La Paloma Country Club is nestled in the Tucson foothills. It's absolutely beautiful.
You can see the city, you can see the mountains. It's Jack Nicklaus Golf Course.
Typical Friday, very busy golf day. Wednesdays and Fridays were gambler days. And so about 5:15, 5:20, I was standing at the bar, and all of a sudden there was this thunderous boom.
I heard this huge bang, and I rushed over there, tried to see if there's something I could do.
Okay, what's going on there? Okay, there's some kind of an explosion in the country club parking lot. I'm not sure. We have one of the victims has no pulse. They've begun CPR. I guess it's a massive fire. It was some kind of an explosion.
The building shook. I'd never felt anything like that. I immediately turned. I went out to the parking lot, and there was a car on fire, split open like a sardine can.
I found a man still sitting in his seat, no pulse, pale, blood's gone out of him, just white.
Dr. Sam Buttman had come up alongside the car towards me. He looked at me and he said, "Damn, he's dead."
Ken Halligan knew who the dead man behind the wheel of the destroyed car was. He was a longtime member of the country club named Gary Triano.
And there's a member, and he was playing with Gary, and he was sitting on the floor next to his locker, and he was just sobbing. They killed Gary, they killed Gary.
But the question was, who killed Gary? And why would they do it in such a spectacular way? The blast had stopped Gary's gold Movado watch at 5:38 p.m. End of the line for a wheeler dealer who was unafraid to gamble on the golf course, or for that matter, in the business world. And according to his lawyer, Ron Lehman, a man always ready to bet big on himself.
Gary was a tall person who would command a room when he walked in. Dark hair, always had a nice suntan, always had a smile. He was larger than life.
Starting in the 1980s, this former car salesman, he'd sought to take advantage of the population boom in Tucson by getting into real estate and land development and gaming on a Native American reservation.
One of Gary's most successful projects was Indian gaming. You're talking about a high-volume slot machine operation. Gary's personal take was $1 million a month.
Gary Triano was not shy about spending that mega money on the finer things in life. You know, limos, Learjets, even a yacht.
He loved spending $25,000 a week on wine while he was cruising around the Adriatic Sea with his financing partners.
Let's have a look at some of these. This one you were just telling us is very special to your heart.
Well, this picture is because it was on my birthday, 16 days before he died. He was very kind and gracious and generous.
That, too, was Gary Triano, a valued role model and mentor for his niece, Melissa Triano. As her uncle and later her employer, he was a figure of warmth and encouragement for her after a childhood full of hardships. What was it like for you, after all the experiences you've gone through, to really get to know this man and to come to respect the way he went through life?
It changed my life. He was the only person that really believed in me and made me feel like I could, be successful with anything.
He'd had 2 children with his wife, Mary. Gary was a devoted father of his son and daughter, and the couple had become a fixture of Tucson society. That changed after Gary crossed paths with a top-earning real estate go-getter. Her name was Pamela Phillips.
Pamela Phillips was very elegant. She played the part of a socialite. She always looked very put together.
Gary told me that, he met the love of his life, and he was really taken aback by this beautiful, intelligent woman.
And Gary, who is so smitten, the story goes that he calls his wife up, who's on vacation in Europe with their 2 children, and he just announces, I'm leaving you.
Pam was a figure of widespread fascination and could be every bit a life-altering sensation. As much of a merger as a marriage, Gary and Pam were officially power-coupled at a black-tie wedding on a yacht in San Diego. Did you hear that the vows they exchanged included the phrase, for richer or for richer, instead of for richer or poorer?
I think I remember that now that you say that, yeah.
You did hear that?
Yeah.
Gary bought Pam a beautiful diamond ring, which he claimed was worth $250,000. They had twin Jaguars. They had this beautiful home at the base of the Catalina Mountains.
Pam and Gary would have 2 kids of their own, while rubbing shoulders with some powerful peers.
Pam and Gary knew Donald Trump, Marla Maples. Donald and Marla came to a University of Arizona basketball game with Gary and Pam.
He invited Donald Trump out to be his partner at the member guest. And of course, he had to make sure that everybody in the club knew a month before.
So, on that fateful day of November 1st, 1996, Gary Triano was approaching his 53rd birthday with a note of optimism, unaware of the big surprise that awaited him as he stepped off the 18th green. In fact, this invite had gone out to all of Gary's friends, inviting them to a surprise birthday party that was to begin in just a few hours.
Around 4:30, Gary was in the bar with a couple of his buddies at a table. One of the members actually walked up to him and actually said, "Happy birthday." I had no idea it was his birthday.
Gary is walking towards his Lincoln Town car, and he's sliding into the seat, and he sees a blue canvas bag on the passenger seat.
An early birthday gift left in his unlocked car by a friend, perhaps? Gary leans over to unzip the bag and...
The impact of the explosion was incredible. The front windshield flew like 200 feet into the air and landed in the swimming pool.
I'm at home, it's after hours, and I get a call from my sergeant, and basically he says there's been a car explosion at the La Paloma Country Club.
Detective James Gamber was a newly minted detective with the Tucson Sheriff's Department, and he was brand new to homicide. This was his second case.
When he arrived on scene, you could see the victim vehicle. It blew the car doors open, tore the roof off the car. Gary's body is still in the driver's seat.
When Melissa Triano heard there had been some sort of incident with Gary, she immediately rushes over to the country club. So what do you remember feeling as you were running towards the car?
Just panic, just shock. I didn't think it was real. The whole top of the car was gone. I still can see it when I close my eyes.
Immediately, cops were asking who could have wanted to kill Gary in such a spectacular fashion. They would quickly learn a lot of people.
Was it to send the message, don't ever mess with us?
So in the movie Casino, Robert De Niro's character, closely based on the real-life mobster Frank Lefty Rosenthal, climbs into his 1983 Eldorado, turns on the ignition, and is engulfed in a fireball.
A bombing sort of has mafia written all over it. Who would want to detonate a bomb at a posh country club in broad daylight with, over 100 witnesses watching?
Arizona has a past with the mob. In the mid-70s, newspaper reporter Don Bowles, he was investigating organized crime, getting national attention, covered by Walter Cronkite.
Don Bowles is a 47-year-old investigative reporter for the Arizona Republic. He's been working on a series about the mafia.
And when Bowles returned to his car, a remote-controlled bomb exploded under the driver's seat.
Bowles uttered the word mafia as he lay dying, but police were never able to pin his death on organized crime. Strictly speaking, what killed Gary Triano was not a car bomb. It was a pipe bomb on the passenger seat, detonated by remote control. And as Detective James Gamber began looking into Gary's murder, the mob was top of mind.
Everybody thought car bombing has to be a mob hit. Very spectacular. We're sending a message. Don't ever mess with us.
Somebody sent a message, and you don't know if they're coming for you next or if it's the whole family. I didn't know if he was involved with something that might want to hurt us all. You were on guard all the time.
But why would the mob, or anyone else, have it in for Gary Triano? Well, maybe because by the time he was leaving that country club on the first day of November 1996, he was no longer the high-flying millionaire everyone thought he was. In fact, Gary was flat broke.
He owed $4.5 million to 4 casinos in Las Vegas that were supposedly had mob ties.
Gary had owned chunks of undeveloped real estate. He'd invested in a radio station, even financed this misbegotten movie, The Mafu Cage, starring Lee Grant, Carol Kane, Will Geer, and an orangutan.
Isn't he too big for her to handle? No, he's not.
Normally, yes, perhaps, but he's very gentle.
Did you ever see your uncle's movie?
Oh my gosh, yes. In fact, I had a horse once and I named it Mafu. And we joke about it still because that movie was just horrible. It was horrible.
But it wasn't movies like that or real estate that was making Gary rich. It was Native American gambling. He was making millions until he wasn't.
The Bureau of Indian Affairs threw him out of the administration of that contract. Gary personally lost $1 million approximately in monthly income.
So suddenly now he's at a zero income, but his expenses and his lifestyle, continued.
These things were happening during the real estate recession, so things hit the fan at once.
Investigators set their sights on Gary Triano's financial dealings because he owed large sums of money to a lot of people.
There were any number of suspects that the sheriff's department was looking at. There were Chinese investors, there were Mexican investors, there were mafia investors, all of whom Gary purportedly owed money to.
It was a house of cards that was crumbling fast. He was promising investors, collateral on property that he didn't own. He was promising Mexican investors money that he didn't have.
He had that gambler mentality, so he was quite a challenge to manage as a member. I constantly chased him financially. He was very good at tipping, but not very good at paying his bills.
And at one point, Pam got a phone call and picked up the phone and heard on the other line a threat from one of the investors saying, you know, we don't get paid, we're gonna kill you. Gary became extremely paranoid, and he starts to sleep with a loaded gun in his bed.
By the 90s, Gary was on the hook for $27 million. He'd run out of time, he'd run out of ideas, and declared bankruptcy.
When Gary ran out of money, his marriage started to disintegrate.
Pam had sort of had enough. She had married this man who was worth millions, and now he wasn't.
So Pam's done, and she files for divorce, and she flees, and she heads off to Aspen with her children.
A bitter divorce and financial ruin left Gary scrambling to stay afloat.
Things were so bad in Gary's life that he went from living in the nicest houses wherever he was around the world to sleeping on a friend's couch.
One of Gary Triano's friends from high school met with Gary Triano the day before he died. Gary was trying to get him and his father to give him a $50,000 loan. His friend described him as anxious and desperate. That loan never happened, and tomorrow never came.
That summit to plummet journey meant it wasn't even his Lincoln Town car that Gary had driven to La Paloma that day. He'd borrowed it from a friend to keep up appearances. And before Gary was even buried, Detective Gamber already had a long list of persons of interest.
We monitor the funeral, as morbid as that may sound. Who shows up, who didn't show up, who wasn't appropriate, who was appropriate. It was a good way to see who should we go talk to.
And Gamber noticed one particularly interesting absence.
Pamela Phillips wasn't at the funeral. She was conspicuously absent. But based on the acrimony and the separation, that didn't really surprise us.
But associates of an eccentric billionaire say he had reasons of his own to want Gary Triano very dead.
He had the capacity and the resources and the henchmen, if you will, to construct the kind of bomb that blew up Gary Triano.
And this doctor claims he saw a kill list written in that man's daily plan.
And it was titled "To Kill," and it was numbered. And right at the top of the list was Gary Triano.
At the Pima County Sheriff's Office, way in the back corner of the impound lot, after 28 years, is Gary Triano's last ride, that 1989 Lincoln Town car. Detective James Gamber showing up close just how devastating that pipe bomb was on that huge mass of Detroit metal.
And this is Gary Triano. This is the car he was driving.
And I know that there's been a lot that's been picked over this, and it's changed over the many years since this crime happened, but you can still see the incredible destruction that took place. This roof is supposed to be flat, essentially, isn't it?
Essentially, right. It should lay right along this line. And you can, if you get a look down here at the frame, you can see where the floorboards have been blown off of the side body panels.
Wow. Just
by the force of that blast downwards.
And the whole arc of this is the result of that bomb also.
Right. Yeah. This, you know, if you looked at this, almost looks like the path of travel of a bullet. Well,
yeah.
Technically it was. It's a projectile, shrapnel.
So everybody knew it was Gary's car. The one thing Gary never did was lock his car.
Lock his car, lock his doors. So I'm the killer.
Right.
I walk up here. I got my duffel bag, my gym bag, which fits in the country club scenario.
Right.
Open the door, put it down, close the door. I walk away.
So finding that killer became Detective Gamber's main goal. There was a monumental list of individuals to go through. But only a few on it were known to have explicit feelings of rage against Gary.
I mean, anytime you have a crime scene this large and this many witnesses, You have to follow every possible lead.
For Detective Jim Gamber, one person with hints of rage was an ex-girlfriend whom he'd broken up with while she was pregnant with his child.
There's a lot of people that talk about how volatile Robin Gardner was.
Robin Gardner was pregnant when Gary left her.
And according to investigators, Robin was so angry, she'd thrown a glass vase at his head.
And this, of course, sent Detective Gamber down another path of like, okay, is this somebody else who might have wanted, Gary dead?
But having met Robin and talked to her, it's like, nah. If it was going to happen, it was going to happen right there. It wasn't going to be, she was going to come back in 6 months and blow his car up.
Even though she was angry at Gary, it was sort of a anger that had dissipated. There wasn't really a reason to investigate her further.
There were a lot of rumors going around about threats that Gary may have received. A lot of the early focus was on people that invested and then Gary lost the money.
There was no shortage of them to check out. When Gary went bust in May of '94, he left $27 million worth of creditors holding the bag, and that was including those Mexican and Chinese investors. Investigators were able to clear all of them. But there was a man who not only got stiffed by Gary Triano, he got humiliated by Gary too, a Tucson trustafarian named Neil McNeese.
Neil McNeese was, by all accounts, a billionaire by inheritance. He was sort of a trust fund baby, if I could use that term, and he had a lot of money. His own Learjet, I think it was, traveled a lot.
He even had his own personal doctor, Lawrence D'Antonio, accompanying him on his travels.
My job was to keep him alive. He was a terrible drug addict and an alcoholic.
He became acquainted with Gary Triano. They probably frequented the same clubs or things of that nature. And Neil McNeese was somebody who had a lot of money to invest or spend on people.
According to investigators, Gary Triano had approached Neil for $80 grand to invest in him immediately. But McNeese wanted collateral for his $80,000 loan, and newly divorced Gary had just the answer.
So Gary Triano gave Neil McNeese Pam Phillips's supposed diamond ring that Gary represented was worth $250,000.
About 5 days later, he goes to his jeweler who tells him, "You're the proud owner of a ring worth about $7,000. It's a cubic zirconium." And Neil went crazy. Went crazy in the jeweler shop, went absolutely crazy.
And so Neil McNeese did not want to be taken as a fool. And so it was said that he had put Gary on a kill list.
It was titled "To Kill." Right at the top of the list, the day I originally saw it, was Gary Triano. And he never stopped saying, "I'm going to kill Gary Triano," from that day.
And his former associates allege, along with his vast wealth, McNeese also knew the right people, people that had the capacity to make a bomb.
The moment I heard on the newscast on my car radio that the victim was Gary Triano, I absolutely believed 100% that he was assassinated by Neil McNeese.
What we could find out about Neil McNeese is that he was in a lot of loudmouth, but very little follow through. Nothing to connect McNeese to a device. And if he killed Gary, that didn't get him his money back. And he wasn't so financially hit that, he was down to his last dime. So did he do it? Again, not a strong connection.
So little hard evidence pointing to anyone for Detective Gamber. But then, out of the clear blue, Pima County receives a call from an out-of-state detective about an abandoned minivan some 500 miles away in California. It's crammed with stuff that has a name on it. That name is Gary Triano. But why? "800 miles away from the Tucson, Arizona desert, atop the snowy mountains of Colorado. Two cases are about to collide, and there's a tantalizing new lead about to emerge, thanks to a fraud investigation by Aspen detective James Crowley into a local named Ron Young.
What I was hearing was he had a great, line to get into your business. He was going to do all these great things for you. I'm so awesome, and I'm going to make you a ton of money.
Ron Young was someone who was, even for the mid-90s, fairly adept at computers and establishing an online presence even back then.
He comes to the attention of Detective Crowley after two local businessmen allege that Ron has stolen more than $100,000, and they both want to press charges.
If Ron became your business manager, he would instantly want all the books, access to all the financials, which gave him an opportunity to transfer money out of your bank account to his own bank account, get credit cards issued in his name on your account.
So Crowley gets search and arrest warrants and sets out to pay Ron Young a visit at his place on Snow Bunny Lane.
So this is Snow Bunny Lane, where Ron Young lived at one point. On the corner where the carport was Ron's house. So we get there and he's gone. He's nowhere to be found.
Ron Young is 6'6", maybe 300 pounds. But where is he gone? 6 months later, Detective Crowley gets a call from the cops in Yorba Linda, California.
What happened was that police in California find an abandoned van, and it's a rental van out of Aspen.
Authorities discovered that the abandoned Dodge Caravan was rented by Ron Young. It was parked outside his parents' house.
And it's an unlocked van. And so when police do come and they open the van, they discover some very unusual things inside.
And as Detective Crowley learns, more than one of those things has Gary Triano's name on it.
There's divorce documents between Gary Triano and Pam Phillips. There are maps of Tucson. There are lists of names of associates with Gary Triano.
And they discover something else that's sort of unusual. It's a sawed-off shotgun. I mean, fraud suspects, they're not usually violent.
It was Crowley's first encounter with Gary Triano's name, but he recognized the name Pamela Phillips because earlier that year, she had walked into the Aspen Police Department and accused Ron Young of stealing money from her bank accounts.
In investigating Ron, there were 2 fraud cases initially, and then Pamela had come in to report the 3rd fraud case.
Detective Crowley had an outstanding warrant for Ron Young's arrest. So why did his still-at-large fraud suspect appear to be all up in the business of this Gary Triano from Tucson, Arizona? Then came November 1st, 1996, and the morning after.
I was sitting at my desk in the investigations office and reading the paper and saw the headline.
It was the shocking pipe bomb murder of Gary Triano.
And it kind of, when you get an adrenaline dump and you get that kind of metal taste in your mouth, and that's kind of what it was.
And so Detective Crowley calls Pima County Sheriff's Department.
And I said, here's what I have. You might be interested in this.
And when Pima County gets this call from Detective Crowley, laying out the evidence retrieved from the van, especially those documents with Gary Triano's name on them, they finally have the connection they've been waiting for.
So what was an Aspen fraud case now is firmly interwoven with our homicide case.
Detective Crowley also hands over to detectives in Tucson a notebook from the van. Inside that notebook, a handwritten list of names, including Gary Triano's niece, Melissa.
They brought it to me, and in that notebook was Melissa Triano, license plate Missy. My license plate said Missy on a black Corvette, and that was my car. So he had been following me, and it was terrifying.
But now, no one can find where Ron Young is or get any answers he might have. And so the investigation into the identity of Gary's killer, it stalls for nearly 10 years. Until an expert enters the case who's got decades of experience. And that helps investigators with the identity of Gary's killer, from a painstaking reconstruction of the bomb itself.
People think when the explosion occurs, everything goes away. Well, it doesn't.
Here we are in New Mexico, Anthony.
Yes.
A typical land of enchantment landscape around us here, right? Kind of desolation and
mountain desert area.
So a decade after the murder of Gary Triano, the case has gone stone cold. The Sheriff's Department decides to invite one of ATF's top bomb experts, Anthony May, into the investigation, just to see if he could help determine who built that bomb that wound up in Gary's car. Anthony, when I think of blowing stuff up in New Mexico, I think of the movie Oppenheimer, something in Los Alamos, right?
Yeah, a little bit south there, but yes.
You guys gotta hold on, hold on.
So if you go just outside Socorro, New Mexico, you'll find this 40-square-mile field laboratory, and it's called the Energetic Materials Research and Testing Center, EMERTEC for short. It's a research and training division of New Mexico Tech, and it's a place where highly skilled bomb specialists do their work with explosives. So we're blowing something up today, aren't we?
Yes, we are. We're going to reenact a bombing that occurred in 1996 that ended up taking Gary Triano's life.
Today, Anthony May is going to take us inside his field of explosive expertise and show us just how this kind of detective work can help authorities identify a killer. What kind of car is this that we're looking at right here?
It's a Ford Mercury Grand Marquis. It's not the exact vehicle, but it is similar in body style and chassis.
Melton Flores is a research engineer and assistant director here at EMERTEC. He and his team are the ones who found the car and put together a pipe bomb, all closely resembling Gary Triano's car and what was inside it on the evening of November 1st, 1996.
Will be safely tucked away in the upper bunker. We have a flag that you'll see behind your shoulder there. That flag is currently in the down position, which means that testing is imminent.
The EMERTEC engineers have these high-speed cameras ready to film the explosion at 20,000 frames per second.
Morning, everybody. So today we got a recreation shot of a 1996 bombing in Arizona. It's going to be a pipe bomb. Once the bomb goes off, we're going to wait until for Merkel he'll give it the all clear. It's the desert, it's hot, so drink plenty of water. We got snakes, we got scorpions, we got spiders, so watch out for all that.
Tesla. Yeah, hold on. Let me do a quick roll call up here.
Like with the Triano case, the pipe bomb is placed in a blue canvas bag and it's positioned on the passenger seat. The technician spools out the firing fuse. We take cover in a bunker some 2,000 feet away.
Everybody's under cover?
All right, we're all good here.
Tesla, your range.
Okay, you ready, Tesla? 2, 1.
That sound was amazing.
I think that could have been the back window that was flying out.
Oh, is that right?
Starting to see some smoke now. I think, it's smoldering a little bit.
Yeah, it looks that way.
The car's on fire.
Every bomb scene tells a story, and the debris scattered by this bomb is much like the debris that was scattered after the bomb that exploded in Tucson on November 1st, 1996. Debris gathered up by law enforcement that Anthony May would go on to analyze. So after the all clear, we move in for a closer look.
It would be up, most of it is going to be up over that bridge. Well, we're going to walk into the blast scene. Now we're starting to pick up some heavy components, and now we're going to decide, is it from the car? Is it from the bomb? And what I'm seeing is car parts here, the door handle. As I can see already, the roof of the car is over here. Looking at the roof of the car, most of our fragments went straight up.
Does it matter to you that it went straight up?
It'll tell me the orientation of that pipe bomb.
That you can take what seems like a scene of classic chaos and create any kind of order out of it is remarkable to us.
That's the objective. Take a look at what the crime scene is telling you, what the evidence tells you, and then go from there.
It is one of the most notorious murders in Tucson history. Opening statements.
Back in 2005, it was Anthony May taking the fragments of that 1996 bomb that killed Gary Triano and reassembling the device, hoping that the process would offer some leads in a case that had grown cold.
This is actually a picture of when Jim brought the evidence up to me. It's just kind of like a puzzle now. I'm trying to match pieces. This is the pieces of the pipe.
So what specifically did you find as you looked at all that evidence?
People think when the explosion occurs, everything goes away. Well, it doesn't. There's 95 to 99% of the device still there. It's in just different configurations. I was able to determine the size. It was about a 17-inch pipe bomb.
So it took Tony May about a month to piece back together all the fragments of the bomb, and he showed us the reproduction he was able to construct. So somehow from all this material, you're able to recreate something that looks very much like what the actual bomb must have been.
Yes.
Is there any indication that Gary Triano would have seen that bag in the seat next to him?
Well, he in fact did see it. There was a witness that said that he saw Gary Triano get in the car and then lean over into the passenger seat, meaning that the bomber was also somewhere close by with the remote control device, and when he saw him lean over the bag, that's when he initiated the device.
And just like any puzzle, once the pieces start to fit together, there's a picture that emerges that would eliminate some suspects and start to bring others into sharper focus.
We had found a piece in the debris here of parts that were soldered together. There were globs of solder.
The globs instantly told you, not somebody who does this on a regular basis.
Doesn't do it on a regular basis. The question to me was, is this a professional hit? Are we dealing with a mafia? From the design, the construction, the soldering, the battery, I don't see that.
Turns out the outdated 6-volt battery used on the bomb was also a clue about the bomber's age.
That indicated to me that we're not dealing with some young individual who has experience with AA batteries or 9-volt batteries.
That it might have been an amateur building their first bomb, and that the choice of battery was suggesting an older suspect, excluded organized crime, and got authorities focusing on the man with the disorganized van, Ron Young.
So the way the device was built fit Ron's profile. So it's just another brick in the wall kind of thing.
And as investigators continued to build that wall, they are intrigued by the enticing link between Ron Young and Gary's ex, Pam Phillips. Were they more than business partners? And will unearthed audio recordings reveal whether Pam was possibly an accomplice in the murder of her ex-husband Gary Triano, or a victim of Ron Young?
I don't even want to talk about it right now.
If I ever found out that you compromised me, you're, a fried duck.
It's a story about sexualizing audio tape and a sensational bombing.
It was something that absolutely shook Tucson to its core. It was horrific, it was violent.
I'm the killer. I got my gym bag, open the door, put it down, close the door, I walk away.
The ex-wife, the business manager, the murder. How do they all fit together?
Pamela Phillips was a socialite, a beautiful blonde bombshell. She was the quintessential trophy wife.
Why would she have been so mad at him?
Nothing went her way through that whole divorce, and she was furious by it.
so she's on the hunt for her next husband.
She said, I need to find a husband that is worth $20 million or more.
Finding them would be the real problem.
Is it okay to talk?
Yeah.
Copy down what you need to copy in your own code and throw this away.
To this day, I keep calling it the treasure trove of evidence. It was astounding what was there.
If he was a real hitman, why is he not threatening her with her life or threatening her family or kids?
It's a sensational trial, complete with sex, money, and murder.
It's summed up in one word: greed.
Here in Tucson, Arizona, handsome, self-confident land developer Gary Triano was married to Pamela Phillips, herself a charismatic player in Tucson real estate. They were a power couple with expensive tastes and the assets to satisfy them.
It was almost like the lifestyles of the rich and famous.
But after the real estate boom went bust, Gary went bankrupt.
Pamela began to realize maybe Gary wasn't all that he was cracked up to be. Like maybe there were little cracks in this armor here. Because Gary started to let her in on some things, like he's indebted to multiple people.
Following their divorce, Glam Pam and their 2 kids moved to Aspen.
I saw Gary as being somewhat downtrodden, somewhat sad. Sad he was losing his family, sad he had lost all his earthly riches.
But ever the optimist, Gary felt confident he'd be on top once again soon. Until November 1st, 1996, when a car bomb blew his comeback and his car to smithereens in a parking lot just like this one. But who or what wanted Gary Triano dead? Despite Pam and Gary's bitter divorce, investigators could see no immediate connection between Pam in Colorado and Gary's pipe bomb murder in Arizona, until cops stumbled across that minivan in California belonging to Ron Young, packed with documents with Gary and Pam's names on them.
It was great because we had no association with Pam and the murder until then. Before we had Pam was in Aspen, the bomb went off in Tucson. How could Pam have pushed the button? Okay, now we have that connection. We have Ron Young bridging that distance for us.
Pima County investigators needed to understand the complex relationship between Pam Phillips and Ron Young. According to friends, that relationship had begun here on Aspen Snow Bunny Lane, where Ron Young lived. Pam was practically his next-door neighbor.
And at the time, Snow Bunny Lane in that area was where kind of working people, doctors, lawyers, normal people in Aspen lived.
It was not Pam Phillips' kind of neighborhood, a long way down from that mansion in Arizona. So she asked her neighbor, Ron Young, to help out on her business idea. It was an astrology website called starbabies.com.
If your baby was born under a certain time, you could get their zodiac and all that. It was that type of thing that Pam wanted to do and start up a little business like that. And he helped set that up.
A new-in-town ski instructor who'd gotten a side gig as a live-in nanny for Pam's 2 kids, Kevin McDonald says he saw a lot of Ron Young.
He would come over and spend time with Pam and was helping her with the star babies, and then he would have dinners with her. And I could see that there's more than just being the down the street neighbor. After the kids were asleep, Pam didn't want them to see them being intimate or being more than just friends.
Kevin would recall Pam as a good and caring mother to her kids. But according to Pam's friends, starbabies.com and Ron Young were only part of her plan. to return to the top of the mountain here in ski country.
Pam was always out in the different private bars and private clubs in Aspen trying to meet rich men. And because she said, you know, I need to find a husband that is worth $20 million or more.
If it was Pam's long-term goal, it was fueled by her short-term needs. She was running out of money. And for that, she blamed Gary Triano. Why would she have been so mad at him?
Nothing went her way through that whole divorce, and she was furious by it. And she wanted money. She needed money to continue her lifestyle.
Once Pam and Gary had cruised on luxury yachts and private planes. Now, Pam was steamed that Gary was making her pay to fly the kids back to Aspen after his visit with them.
Pam told me one night after I put the kids to bed, she just said that, you know, she was down to her last $60,000. So I knew that she was worried. She was bleeding money. She wasn't making any money.
Pam was convinced that Gary was hiding assets, so allegedly she asked Ron Young to find them.
Pam's chief complaint during this entire relationship is she's not receiving enough child support from Gary, and he must be hiding assets. But Ron is still really pissed off that he's not being paid for his services.
Because of their business relationship, Ron had access to her accounts, and he allegedly started taking out money for himself. That's what led Pam to report Ron's alleged fraud in the first place. Yet it wasn't long after that Ron Young skipped town and vanished. He was one step ahead of an Aspen arrest warrant.
After Pam came in the initial time, and I asked her to provide follow-up documentation, she never came back.
Ron Young is nowhere to be found, but Pima County sheriffs decide to talk with Pam.
And then when you go to interview Pam, she minimizes Ron Young. Oh, he was not involved in my life. He gave me a little financial advice and things like that.
Yet less than a year later, Pam is out of Snow Bunny Lane and into a $1 million home. Why were authorities so interested in her change of fortune?
Pam had 2 million reasons to kill Gary.
Pothole number 3. Allegedly, that's how the twice-divorced Pam Phillips referred to Ron Young, her sometime lover, neighbor, and business associate, in a note she wrote to her aunt.
Ron was not her type. She was used to handsome, charismatic, wealthy men, and Ron was nothing like that.
When Pam moved up to Aspen, she purported not to have any money, was in financial hard times.
There was, however, a $2 million life insurance policy on Gary Triano's life, set up to take care of his 2 kids with Pam.
They were the beneficiaries, with the proviso that if they were under the age of 18, then Pam was the one that would receive the money and appropriately apply it to the children's lives.
Now, even with a friend's assistance, Pam's financial straits were affecting her ability to pay for that policy.
And then we find out that when Pam learned of Gary's death, she was actually almost 30 days in arrear on her premium payment.
Pamela Phillips became hysterical. Not hysterical over Gary's death, but hysterical over the fact that the premium had not been paid for the month of November.
And they rushed a FedEx payment to the insurance company that got there too late. The insurance company, though, honored it anyway.
And 15 days later, Pamela makes a claim on Gary's life.
So it took until January of 1997 before the insurance company paid. Pam got a little over $2 million.
Pam Phillips wastes no time. As soon as she gets this $2 million life insurance proceeds, she goes out and she buys her dream mansion. And it's this home in Meadowood. It has its own ski lift. It's a buttressed against the mountains. It's got these like massive wooden doors. It has marble all over the floor.
So as Pam was spending that life insurance money and climbing back into Aspen society, Gary's murder remained unsolved. It was a burden on the entire Triano clan, the notoriety haunting their every move.
If I said my name, you know, I get a million questions or a million comments on the matter. Are you related to Boom Boom Triano? Like horrible things people would say.
They would refer to your uncle as Boom Boom?
Boom Boom Triano was one. There was all kinds of weird things that they said.
So by 2005, this case had really become a cold case.
So we had this one anomaly, Ron Young. And it was, where's Ron Young? Where's Ron Young? Aspen PD had the arrest warrant, so he could be arrested anywhere within U.S. jurisdiction, and just nothing was coming of it. He was like a puff of smoke.
In hopes of teasing Ron Young out of hiding, Detective Gamber uses his network of undercover agents and investigators to approach the TV show America's Most Wanted.
The manhunt for November 19th is now in progress.
Then in 2005, a segment on Ron Young goes on the air.
Could this accused con man also be a cold-blooded killer? Well, cops in Arizona want to find that out.
Right after the America's Most Wanted episode airs, it happens to catch the eye of a chiropractor in Florida whose patient is none other than Ron Young.
So this chiropractor out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, informs America's Most Wanted that not only is his patient Ron Young, but Ron has a scheduled appointment the very next day.
And that's a huge break in the case, because now law enforcement, America's Most Wanted, they can all descend on Florida and make the capture.
Sure enough, Ron Young shows up in time for his appointment.
After his appointment, Ron is returning to his car when Broward County's fugitive unit makes the arrest. All of it captured on America's Most Wanted.
Right behind your back. What's your name? Hey, man. I asked you your name.
Ron Young.
Authorities hold Ron Young on fraud and weapons charges because when Ron's apprehended, he's got a loaded Colt .380 semi-automatic gun in his possession. So now, detectives race to Florida to see what Ron Young might have to say about Pamela Phillips and Gary Triano. But when they touch down, they get a big surprise, one that will blow this case wide open.
We walk over to this box, and there's some microcassettes sitting in there. And it's like, anybody have a microcassette recorder? And what was on there is, to this day, I keep calling it the treasure trove of evidence. It was astounding what was there.
I don't even want to talk about it right now.
What I'm saying is if I ever found out that you compromised me for your benefit, it'd be really unfortunate for you.
After being featured on the show America's Most Wanted,
Right behind your back.
Ron Young is arrested in Florida.
Hey, man. I asked you your name.
Ron Young.
Crowley, it calls us and says they got him. So they start talking to Ron Young, and Ron says, sure, you can search my apartment. And yeah, you can search the storage locker I have.
He gives them kind of an extraordinary gift. And it's like he's opening up his treasure trove of evidence for law enforcement. And what they discover, is a major break in the case.
Among the physical evidence seized from Ron's properties, detectives find spreadsheets, FedEx receipts, thousands of email printouts, and letters that shockingly reveal Pam and Ron had been in contact the whole time Ron was a fugitive, even after Pam had accused Ron of fraud and minimized their relationship to police. I think the apparent connection between us is best kept at a minimum, she writes. I don't want to appear as too much of a helper, though you know I am. I love you and count on you. Pamela.
So there was obviously more of a relationship than she was letting on.
But then, as far as evidence goes, the coup de grace.
We walk over to this box, and there's some micro cassettes sitting in there. And it's like, anybody have a micro cassette recorder? And so we pop one of the tapes in, we hit play.
You sent my money yet? My principal.
I am not going to keep sending you more and more money unless I know that you can honor our agreement.
And it's Ron Young's voice and Pam Phillips's voice. We immediately turn the tapes off. We box those up immediately, and those go to the lab to be professionally transferred.
It takes months just for detectives to listen and catalog the dozens of hours of telephone conversations that Ron has secretly recorded. And the contents are stunning.
I'm really happy that your 1.6 was tax-free.
Just say yes. I will take the forward like it's been coming, and I'd like the balance of it as quick as possible. Yes.
Yes, I want it all. I want it all. I want it all as soon as possible. We have no disagreement.
You start to listen to the phone calls, and the next thing you hear is, you got your 2, I want my 4. Well, you have a $2 million insurance policy, and you have Ron getting $400 and some odd thousand in cash from Pam.
Recovered emails and FedEx receipts detail how, at Ron Young's direction, Pam made regular cash payments to him, choreographed, authorities believe, in a manner to avoid detection.
You start following Ron telling Pam, this is how you hide taking the money from your accounts and sending it as cash to me. And he gives her a detailed process to follow.
He was instructing her to take out certain amounts of money at different locations, use different accounts, don't mail from the same place twice, vary your pattern so no one gets wise.
Is it okay to talk?
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing that shows me having any contact since I left Aspen, or ever really. If you, for any reason, need to keep dates or numbers or anything else, obviously just transpose it into codes.
For investigators, this game of subterfuge and these under-the-radar payments from Pam to Ron is starting to smell like a murder conspiracy.
What he had on his computer was astounding. Pam was paying him on a monthly basis, and he had his own amortization table of the money Pam was paying him with the interest that was due, and it totaled something like $440,000.
Armed with this new evidence, police get a warrant to search Pam's place, the Aspen mansion her slice of the insurance money paid for.
In September of 2006, Pima County Sheriff's Department joined forces with the Aspen Police Department and surround her house, and they knock on the door and they say, we have a search warrant.
Pamela answers the door and they tell her, we have a warrant to search your house, and she said no and closed the door in their face.
Pamela Phillips is completely surprised by this. She tells the police, yeah, my lawyer's on the way, and the detective says, I have a search warrant. So they come in, and the way she describes it is like they're scattering across her marble floors like rats.
While we're executing the search warrant, Pamela decides to leave, and we don't have an arrest warrant for her at that point, so she's free to leave.
She gets into her little Mini Cooper and drives off.
Meanwhile, after pleading guilty to firearms charges, Ron Young is sentenced to 10 months in prison in Florida. After his jail term, he's sent back to Aspen.
He gets extradited to Aspen to face the fraud charges. And it's there that the fraud charges get dismissed. After the charges are dismissed in Aspen, we don't have enough to charge him with the homicide yet. So he is free, but he's on parole from the federal prison.
Ron Young moves to his parents' house in Yorba Linda, California.
So there's all this stuff that's coming together. There's the suspicions about the life insurance policy. Now we've got Ron Young, who's an associate of Pam Phillips, and all these things in the van in California, the names and a notepad of people associated with Gary Triano, maps of Tucson, receipts from a hotel in Tucson near where Gary was living at the time.
After nearly 12 years, the police finally obtain arrest warrants, hoping to bring long-awaited justice in the case of Gary Triano.
We're going to do a simultaneous arrest. We've already put surveillance teams in Aspen, surveillance teams in Yorba Linda. We hit Ron and we arrest him. We go to hit Pam and we do a records check on her, and we find out she flew out of the country to destinations unknown. She was gone.
On Friday, October 17th, 2008, cops mount a large-scale operation to simultaneously arrest Ron Young and Pam Phillips for the 1996 murder of her ex, Gary Triano.
We have the arrest warrants. We've already put surveillance teams in Yorba Linda. We've coordinated with local law enforcement. We hit Ron and we arrest him. We extradite him back to Tucson.
But when it comes to arresting Pam, they have a rude awakening.
Pam Phillips, we have every reason to believe, is still living at her house in Aspen. We go to hit Pam and we do a records check on her and we find out she flew out of the country. She was gone.
Pima County investigators named Young and Triano's former wife, Pamela Phillips, as suspects in the case. They're still looking for Phillips and believe she may be out of the country.
So we have to put out a notice with Interpol. So now the United States Marshals Service and the FBI become involved.
Unbeknownst to police, Pam is in Europe, and she's leaning into the alpine lifestyle in a swanky lakeside town in Switzerland called Lugano.
She has just picked up where she left off. She's recreated her world over there. She's hobnobbing with the elite. She's off hunting again for a rich, eligible bachelor. In fact, has been spotted with several.
While out in Lugano, it's just not Pam's style to keep a low profile. And so, sure enough, a local tipster hears news of Pam's murder indictment and picks up the phone.
I'm sitting at my desk, and I get a call. There's a gentleman who'd like to talk to you. He thinks he knows where Pam is. So everybody's poised to go arrest Pam in Lugano, Switzerland.
But there's a hitch. See, the Swiss government wants a guarantee that the U.S. won't invoke the death penalty. Gamber and his team are able to work out the details.
But when the Swiss police went to arrest her, yeah, she wasn't there.
Ultimately, there's a multinational effort that leads to Pam's arrest in Austria. And while she's sitting in a jail cell in Vienna awaiting extradition, back in the States, Ron Young goes on trial.
The trial itself started in March of 2010. We had been doing pretrial litigation for at least a year and a half leading up to that point.
Some of the challenges that the prosecution faced in Ron's trial was that it was a circumstantial evidence case. They didn't have any direct evidence that linked Ron Young to the bomb.
The prosecution acknowledges no one reported seeing Ron in Tucson on or around November 1st, 1996, nor did he have anything in his possession specifically tying him to Arizona or to Gary Triano on the date of his murder. However, the prosecution does have Anthony May.
My job was to determine what was used and build a reconstruction of the device, and then the device was used to present it in court for his prosecution.
He was able to recreate the entire bomb all the way down to the battery purchased from Radio Shack, the remote-controlled air switch used to operate it, to detonate it, and even down to the duffel bag purchased from Walmart. That was an impressive display in front of the jury, I think.
And the prosecution also had those micro cassette tapes.
I helped you on something that was, beyond what anybody else in the world would probably do, and I think that deserves some consideration, since you're living off the benefits of it.
The prosecution makes the case that in their conversations, Pam and Ron were talking about the murder of Gary Triano.
I am not going to keep sending you more and more money unless I know that you can honor our agreement.
The prosecution points out to the jury an email that surfaced from Ron to Pam, referring to Gary as an 800-pound monster.
The communication between Ron and Pam was the crux of the case.
The defense countering that Ron was simply extorting money from Pam.
What Ron did, he's not proud of, was blackmail Pam.
Then there was also an out-of-the-blue prison witness with a prosecution-perfect account to tell the jury. Andre Mims, a cellmate of Ron Young's when he was in prison for the 2005 gun charges.
He looked me in my face. He said, Andre, I blew that up in his car.
For the prosecution, Ron Young's one statement to Andre Mims, how he blew Gary Triano up, might as well have been a confession.
But the defense claimed this testimony was made up and immediately called for a mistrial. The motion was denied.
I think we felt confident. I mean, as a prosecutor, even on a strong case, you're always concerned about the potential one outlier juror that could lead to a hung jury.
After 13 hours, the jury reached a verdict.
For the defendant, Ronald Kelly Young, guilty of the offense of first-degree murder.
Ron Young was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder.
Ron Young is sentenced to life in prison.
We can't tell you how many times we thought we would never see who killed my father.
But for Gary Triano's family, the story is far from over, and justice has not been served yet.
We still need Pam, and there's a long road still with that.
That long road would lead to a fateful night in July 2010. A plane with Pam Phillips on board, making its way from Vienna to an airport in Arizona, where Melissa Triano and Detective Jim Gamber were waiting.
I think her flight came in at midnight, and we stood outside of the airport and watched her come off the plane.
Pam's comment to the U.S. Marshals was, if Gamber's in the airport, I'm not getting off the plane. They walked her out of the jetway, turned her over to me. They had to walk her all the way out to a patrol car.
I wanted her to see our faces and to know that we were never giving up on bringing her to justice.
As Pam prepares to go on trial, her public defender would mount an ambitious murder trial defense.
This will not be a short trial when it starts. Phillips' defense has listed about 100 witnesses.
He's making these threats to embarrass her. He knows that she is in all these newspaper articles.
Could he surprise everyone and get Pam a not guilty verdict? Gary Triano had left his first wife to pursue Pam Phillips. Then, as a Tucson power couple, they lived high on the hog. Now, 17 years after he was killed, Pam Phillips was on trial for Gary's murder.
For anyone who likes a sensational trial, complete with sex, money, and murder, this one was worth the wait. It has it all.
The trial began February 2014. There was a ton of attention and anticipation. All eyes were on Pamela Phillips.
I think it was probably the biggest case we've ever had.
The Aspen socialite on trial for killing her ex-husband with a car bomb. Pamela Phillips maintains her innocence, but prosecutors say they can prove she's a killer.
For the Triano family, this case represents the ultimate hope in finally bringing justice for Gary. How was that trial for you and your family?
It was very difficult to sit through when photos or evidence was going to be shown that would be hard. I would get up and walk out.
What made it imperative that you be there then?
It was knowing the truth.
Prosecutors argued that the main reason that Pamela Phillips orchestrated this murder on her ex-husband was the $2 million life insurance policy.
The bulk of our evidence came from Ron Young, the FedEx receipts, the phone calls, the emails that Ron Young had saved.
With records taken from that abandoned minivan in 1996, prosecutors argue how Ron Young closely surveilled Gary Triano's comings and goings, as well as those of Gary Triano's relatives, which included very specific details about Melissa Triano, who took the stand.
The last line has your name on it again, correct?
Yes.
Melissa Triano. Just above your name, what does it say there?
Corvette convertible niece.
The prosecution then brings out a key witness, Laura Chapman, a former friend of Pam's, who recalls a conversation she says she had with Pam before Gary's death.
She said that she should just hire a hitman, have him taken out, and that the insurance policy was a $2 million insurance policy. And she said it would just be really easy to do because he was so predictable, because he played golf every day.
The defense claimed Laura's memory was faulty and that Pam was not desperate for the life insurance money because she'd lapsed on that last premium payment.
If you're going to do a murder for hire for the insurance money, aren't you going to be sure that the insurance policy is in place and has been paid?
But for the prosecution, big piece of the puzzle were those taped phone conversations between Ron and Pam, discussing Ron's alleged $400,000 cut of that life insurance policy, where, in the view of the prosecution, Ron says the quiet part out loud.
Right now, I want to know that we are capping it at 4. I don't want this nebulous thing out there that we're supposedly supposed to...
It's not nebulous.
Listen to me. I am very serious about this.
Well, I tell you, you're going to be very serious when you sit in a women's prison for murder.
Oh yeah, that for the jury was our smoking gun.
But defense attorneys assert Ron and Pam were not talking about the murder of Gary Triano. Instead, he was extorting Pam for money.
I'm terrified of everything.
I know.
I mean, I'm living in total fear.
He's making these threats to embarrass her. He knows that she is in all these newspaper articles as a suspect in her ex-husband's bombing. He wants to threaten her reputation in the Aspen community. If he was a real hitman, why is he not threatening her with her life or threatening her family or kids? That's what happens when you have a cold-blooded killer.
The defense doesn't just try to point out how neither Ron nor Pam could be tied directly to the bomb at the scene of the crime. The defense goes one step further and says the culprit is somebody else entirely. Hot-headed billionaire heir Neil McNeese, out that 80 grand to Triano and enraged by his lies and deceit.
Neil McNeese. He lends Gary $80,000 and gets a ring for collateral. He finds out the ring is only worth $8,000 and he's livid. He's furious. He threatens to kill Gary per Dr. D'Antonio.
Remember, Dr. D'Antonio had come forward after Gary died, claiming that Gary Triano was on Neil McNeese's alleged kill list and that he was responsible for Gary Triano's death.
Lawrence D'Antonio was called to the stand, and this was really the crutch of the defense's argument.
I wouldn't describe Neil as a friend.
I heard Neil say he was going to kill Gary Triano probably 10,000 times. It was pure obsession. His hatred was pure obsession.
The defense argues that McNeese not only had motive, he also had the means, with a woodworker friend named Jerry Capuano, who they claim had a shop and the know-how to make a remote-controlled pipe bomb.
The other things found at Mr. Capuano's shop. You saw that little red thing that was used to put together wires. There was one of those at Capuano's shop. There's an exact one of those in the bomb parts that were found.
It makes for an interesting story. They're saying, oh, look at this. Neil McNeese was the real killer, and Capuano was the person who made the bomb. All of them are deceased, so we're not able to follow up on this.
Authorities continue to assert there's no evidence tying McNeese or Capuano to the murder. The McNeese family issuing a statement in 2014, maintaining their belief in his innocence and relief that justice might prevail.
But I mean, the bottom line is we don't have any question whatsoever that Pam Phillips hired Ron Young to kill Gary.
Pamela Phillips never testified during the entire trial. We got glimpses of her personality, right? During the trial, she would look at the camera, she would smile at the camera, even mouthing the words at one point, "I love you," to the camera during court proceedings.
The camera had always loved Pam right back. Now, after 2 months of testimony, it was time to see what a jury would feel about Pam Phillips as they decided her fate.
The lights flickered in the courtroom. My cousin Heather was sitting in front of me, and she turned and looked, and we just lost it.
We're on verdict watch as jury deliberation continues in the Pamela Phillips murder for hire trial. The Aspen socialite is accused of hiring...
After 26 days of testimony, with 100 witnesses, 670 exhibits, the fate of Pam Phillips lies in the hands of the jury.
to find the defendant, Pamela Ann Phillips, guilty of first-degree murder.
Quiet cries of joy and justice. Triano's family says today's verdict has been a long time coming.
Like seconds after the judge said guilty, the lights flickered in the courtroom. It was surreal.
What did that tell you, those lights?
That he was there. That he knows.
Gary's family was relieved by all this. The murder was in 1996. Our trial was now 18 years later. I mean, I don't think they wanted it to be Pam, but they knew it was.
Pamela Phillips' attorney maintains his client is not responsible for her ex-husband's death.
The fact that she's going to prison is going to eat away at me the rest of my life.
Pamela Phillips was sentenced to life in prison without parole.
After hearing her sentence, the once prominent socialite turns to address a packed courtroom, the only way she could do so without facing questions.
I am innocent. I am innocent. I am innocent, okay? This is hard. It's so hard for me. It's a nightmare.
She showed no remorse. She actually turned around to the gallery for the first time. At this point, she was just pandering to the camera.
And I don't understand how this can even happen, right?
Never any mention as to the loss of life, but everything came back to the impact it had on her personally.
Outside the courtroom, after losing their father almost 2 decades earlier, Gary's children expressing both gratitude and sadness at the outcome.
We'd like to thank all our friends and everyone who supported us through this entire time. And we're sorry that it had to come to this, because this woman was actually part of our family.
Meanwhile, Pam's accomplice, Ron Young, also spending the rest of his life in prison, and he's exhausted all of his appeals. Pam, however, is still fighting for post-conviction relief based on DNA evidence found back in 2014.
We found DNA on threads of 2 screws that were embedded into the platform, which was wood, for the pipe bomb. When that came in, we were able to exclude Ronald Young.
Pam's appellate attorney maintaining that new, more sophisticated DNA technology will prove that someone other than Ron Young and Pam Phillips murdered Gary Triano.
Well, the next step in the process, we did file our petition for post-conviction relief. I'm hopeful that we can do some genealogical testing if we can find the money to do that.
They get better DNA that come back and tie to Jerry Capuano, then that might get her a chance for a new trial.
Prosecutors stand by the verdict. They continue to say that neither billionaire Neil McNeese nor his friend Jerry Capuano were in any way responsible for Gary's murder.
Where I find fault with this is that they didn't submit Gary Triano as a reference sample. Now, whose DNA do you think is probably all over that scene? How do you buy screws at a hardware store? You don't buy screws that have never been touched by another human being. So finding some lone DNA profile and a blast debris doesn't impress me.
How do you like to remember your Uncle Gary?
Every November 1st, I would go to La Paloma Golf Course and put flowers in the 18th hole.
At a local cemetery, there's a bench inscribed with his name and Gary's favorite poem, Rudyard Kipling's If, the classic tribute to the same endurance and optimism that Melissa always saw in her uncle, who in the face of life's setbacks and defeats sought always to remain admirably strong. Would you mind reading part of it for us out loud?
If you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those 2 impostors just the same, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginning, and never breathe a word about your loss. And that's just how my uncle lived.
The Triano family filed a $10 million wrongful death civil action against Pam Phillips.
The judge ruled in the family's favor for that $10 million. That is our program for tonight. Thanks for watching. I'm David Muir.
And I'm Deborah Roberts. From all of us here at 2020 and ABC News, good night.
Shadows of Deception, a criminological analysis of facade and forensics. In the study of criminal psychology, the concept of the facade is perhaps the most enduring and dangerous. Human beings are naturally inclined to trust the patterns of daily life, the friendly local artisan, the devoted parent, the grieving spouse, the hardworking neighbor. When a violent crime occurs, the human mind struggles to reconcile the horror of the act with the familiar face of the perpetrator. This psychological dissonance often allows criminals to hide in plain sight, sheltered by the community's reluctance to believe that such darkness can exist behind a polite exterior. Yet, as the field of criminal investigation has evolved, the methods of uncovering these facades have transformed. Where investigators once relied almost entirely on eyewitness testimony and physical clues left at the immediate scene, modern forensics operates on a scale that is both microscopic and digital. The modern detective must be a psychologist, a scientist, and a digital archivist, piecing together fragments of deoxyribonucleic acid, analyzing the invisible pathways of cellular signals, and decoding the subtle shifts in human behavior during interrogation. This narrative explores 4 distinct criminal investigations across the United States. Each case represents a unique confrontation between a constructed facade of innocence and the relentless, grinding progress of justice. These are stories not merely of crime, but of the quiet, enduring dedication of the investigators, who refuse to let the truth remain buried, and the resilience of the families left to carry the memories of the lost. The Pass of the Oaks and the Silent Geofence. The landscape of Paso Robles, California, is often described as a fairy tale. Nestled halfway between the bustling metropolises of San Francisco and Los Angeles, its real name, El Paso de Robles, translates to the Pass of the Oaks. It is a region characterized by rolling hills, ancient oak trees, quiet vineyards, and secluded ranches. For generations, it has served as a scenic getaway, a place where people seek tranquility. But down El Faro Road, in the middle of this natural beauty, an act of sudden violence shattered the peace of the valley. Nancy Woodrum was a fixture in the Paso Robles community. At 62 years of age, she ran a popular downtown salon called The Strand. Her clients knew her as a woman of immense warmth, generous spirit, and open-hearted kindness. Following the passing of her husband several years prior, Nancy lived alone on her picturesque property, which she had named Paradise Ranch. She was a devout member of the Jehovah's Witnesses, dedicating much of her free time to her faith. and sharing her beliefs with others. Paradise Ranch was a labor of love. Nancy and her late husband had purchased the fixer-upper property in 2006, remodeling the two-story Victorian home with its wraparound porches and weeping willow trees
to help sustain
herself. Nancy eventually converted the main Victorian house into a popular vacation rental while she resided in a smaller, adjacent guest cottage on the
property.
On Friday, the 4th of May, 2018, a large group of wedding guests checked into Paradise Ranch. The party, consisting of more than 20 individuals, was celebrating a wedding at a local winery.
De Bride had met
Nancy briefly upon arrival, recalling her as exceptionally welcoming, even offering a warm embrace. It was the last time anyone outside of the perpetrator would see Nancy Woodrum alive. The alarm was raised the following afternoon, Saturday, the 5th of May. Amanda, Nancy's daughter and fellow hairstylist, received a concerning phone call informing her that her mother had failed to appear for a scheduled Bible
study.
Such an absence was entirely uncharacteristic of Nancy. Anxious, Amanda requested that a neighbor walk over to Nancy's cottage to check on her. The neighbor arrived to find the front door wide open, the television blaring, and no sign of Nancy. When Amanda arrived at the property, the scene immediately filled her with
dread.
Inside the cottage, her mother's purse, car keys, cellular telephone, and tablet computer were sitting on a bench. Her 2 vehicles remained parked outside. But there were terrifying anomalies. A deep stain marked the carpet. The sheets and bedding from Nancy's bed were missing. Upon closer inspection, Amanda noticed what appeared to be dark splatter on the bedroom walls. Panic setting in, she called 911. The first responding deputies from the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office recognized the gravity of the situation immediately. Senior Deputy Clinton Cole, a seasoned investigator, arrived at the secluded property. He walked into the cottage and noted the absence of forced entry, but the interior spoke of a violent struggle. 2 large bloodstains marred the floor. Splatter was visible on a nearby cabinet, the headboard of the bed, and the back wall. A beige pillow left on the bed bore a heavy saturation of blood. The initial hypothesis was grim. Nancy Woodrum had been assaulted inside her bedroom and taken from the property against her will. As investigators began processing the cottage, a critical discovery was made. Several miles away, an officer with the California Highway Patrol reported finding discarded bedding and clothing along La Ponza Road, approximately 7 miles from Paradise Ranch. The items included a blood-stained pillow, a dress, a pair of shorts, a shirt, and a gingham print sheet that matched the remaining bedding in Nancy's cottage. Amanda confirmed the items belonged to her mother. The realization settled heavily upon the investigative team. Nancy had likely been wrapped in her own bedding and transported from the scene, either severely injured or deceased. The challenge facing the detectives was monumental. They were dealing with a crime scene situated on a remote ranch, But the potential suspect pool was exceptionally large. Over 20 wedding guests had been staying in the main Victorian house immediately adjacent to Nancy's cottage. Furthermore, Nancy had recently placed Paradise Ranch on the market, intending to retire and focus on her faith. Consequently, numerous independent contractors, painters, plumbers, and landscapers had possessed access to the property in the preceding weeks. The detectives began the painstaking process of interviewing every individual associated with the wedding party. The timing of the disappearance was estimated to be late Friday night or early Saturday morning. Most of the wedding guests had been attending a rehearsal dinner until late Friday evening, returning to the ranch around 10:30 or 11 o'clock. One particular wedding guest, however, drew the interest of investigators. He had not attended the rehearsal dinner, choosing instead to remain at the ranch. During initial interviews, this individual became increasingly defensive and uncooperative, eventually refusing to speak with detectives without legal counsel. This behavior naturally raised a red flag. To resolve the suspicion, detectives traveled to the guest's residence in Northern California. Upon arrival, they found him far more cooperative. His wife provided photographs from her mobile telephone showing that he had indeed attended the rehearsal dinner later in the evening, successfully accounting for his whereabouts. The guest also voluntarily provided a sample of his deoxyribonucleic acid, which eventually cleared him of any involvement. Investigators then turned their attention to the contractors who had worked on the ranch. One individual of interest was Sean Bloom, a general contractor who had recently been terminated by Nancy following a heated dispute over the quality of his work and outstanding payments. Bloom made no secret of his frustration with Nancy, even showing detectives text messages where he threatened legal action. However, he cooperatively provided a voluntary sample of his deoxyribonucleic acid, which did not match the foreign profile discovered on the bloody pillow in Nancy's cottage. The investigation also briefly examined Nancy's estranged son, Chad. The relationship between mother and son had been highly strained for years, largely due to Chad's resentment toward the family's religion. Text messages showed they had communicated the night of her disappearance. When approached by detectives, Chad expressed a deep distrust of law enforcement and refused to provide a voluntary sample of his deoxyribonucleic acid. Detectives placed Chad under surveillance, eventually observing him consuming beverages at a local establishment. After he discarded the containers, investigators retrieved them. The subsequent forensic analysis cleared him of any connection to the crime scene. By the end of the first month, the investigation had stalled. Every prominent lead had been exhausted, and the suspect pool had yielded no results. The public grew anxious, and the family was desperate for answers. It was at this critical juncture that the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office decided to employ an innovative investigative tool, a Google geofence search warrant. At the time, in 2018, geofencing was a relatively novel concept in California law enforcement. The process involved drawing a virtual perimeter, or fence, around a specific geographic location during a precise window of time. Investigators utilized a crucial timestamp. Nancy's cellular telephone records revealed an attempted 911 call on her bill at 12:17 in the morning on Saturday, the 5th of May. The call had lasted for 0 seconds, suggesting it had been disconnected almost instantly. This gave detectives a highly accurate window of when the assault occurred. The geofence search warrant was served to Google, requesting data for any devices that had entered the virtual boundary around Nancy's cottage between midnight and 2 o'clock in the morning. When the results returned, they revealed a device pinging inside Nancy's studio cottage at 1:33 and again at 1:52 in the morning. The wedding guests' devices had been cleared, but this specific device was assigned a unique identification number that did not match any guest. A subsequent warrant for subscriber information revealed the owner of the device, Carlo Fuentes Flores. The name was immediately familiar to the detectives. Carlo Fuentes Flores was a local painter who had been hired to paint the decks on the main Victorian house at Paradise Ranch. He had been interviewed briefly in the early stages of the investigation, appearing exceptionally polite, cooperative, and mild-mannered. He had spoken warmly of Nancy, recalling how she had praised his hard work and even offered him a tamale. He had no prior criminal record in either the United States or Mexico. He was a father, a husband, and, by all accounts, a quiet professional. The geofence data, however, placed his mobile telephone directly inside Nancy's home at the exact hour of her disappearance. There was no plausible professional reason for a painter to be inside Nancy's private residence in the early hours of the morning. Detectives began a deep analysis of Fuentes Flores' digital life. When they obtained his search history, they discovered a stark contrast to his polite daytime persona. His search queries revealed a persistent interest in adult entertainment, featuring older women, matching Nancy's demographic, as well as searches for escort services. His telephone contained numerous self-shot videos of sexual encounters. The psychological profile began to shift. The cooperative painter was harboring a secret life characterized by impulsivity and deviant desires. To secure an arrest, investigators required physical evidence linking Fuentes Flores to the bloodstains in the cottage. The combined DNA index system had returned no matches for the foreign deoxyribonucleic acid found on Nancy's bloody pillow, which bore a partial handprint in blood. Undercover officers placed Fuentes Flores under surveillance. They followed him to a local restaurant where he had lunch with his wife. After he departed, investigators collected the plastic Coca-Cola bottle he had used. The forensic laboratory extracted a deoxyribonucleic acid profile from the bottle, comparing it to the profile from the bloody pillow. It was an exact match. On a cold morning, detectives brought Carlo Fuentes Flores into the interrogation room. Initially, he maintained his friendly, helpful demeanor, detailing his work on the ranch and reiterating that he did not know where Nancy lived on the property. Slowly, the investigators began to apply pressure, showing him photographs of the ranch and placing his presence on the property. When the detectives directly confronted him with the forensic evidence, informing him that his deoxyribonucleic acid had been discovered in the blood on Nancy's pillow, the change in his demeanor was immediate. The polite facade crumbled. His posture stiffened, his breathing grew shallow, and he began to perspire. He realized the investigators possessed irrefutable proof of his presence. Faced with the inevitability of his exposure, Fuentes Flores attempted to construct a mitigating narrative. He claimed that he had returned to the ranch late at night to retrieve a ladder for his next job. As he was backing his truck up, he claimed he accidentally struck Nancy, who had walked behind his vehicle. He insisted that he had carried her inside her cottage to help her, where she subsequently collapsed, causing the bloodstains. The detectives, however, knew the physical evidence contradicted this story. There were no signs of vehicular trauma on the property, and the blood splatter patterns indicated a violent assault inside the bedroom, not a clinical attempt to render aid. Under continued questioning, Fuentes Flores admitted to the full scope of his actions. He confessed that he had entered the cottage with the intent to sexually assault Nancy. When she awoke and struggled, attempting to dial 911, he struck her, repeatedly raped her, and ultimately suffocated her with a pillow to prevent her from identifying him. The critical question remained, where was Nancy Woodrum? In a striking turn, Fuentes Flores offered to lead the detectives to the location where he had hidden her remains. Investigators placed him in a vehicle and began an hour-long drive eastward, away from the fertile valleys of Paso Robles and toward the barren, desert topography of the Carrizo Plain. The landscape was vast and unforgiving, making the search incredibly difficult. Fuentes Flores' memory of the exact location was hazy, and he stopped at several incorrect spots, causing anxiety to mount among the search team. Finally, near a remote dirt road, Deputy Cole noticed a small, unnatural pile of rocks stacked in a circle in the high grass. Upon approaching the rocks, investigators discovered human remains. Animal activity had scattered the bones, but a human skull and leg bone were clearly visible. Fuentes Flores fell to his knees and began to weep, seemingly overwhelmed by the reality of his exposure. It was a somber, tragic end to a months-long search, but it provided the family with the closure they had desperately sought. In January of 2022, rather than face a lengthy public trial, Carlo Fuentes Flores agreed to a slow plea. Under this legal arrangement, the prosecution presented the overwhelming evidence to the judge, who subsequently found him guilty of first-degree murder with the special circumstance of commit during a rape and burglary. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His subsequent appeal was denied in July of 2023. Nancy Woodrum was remembered by hundreds who gathered at a local vineyard for her memorial. She was a woman who had survived multiple personal tragedies, including the loss of 2 children and her husband, yet she had maintained an unwavering faith and a beautiful, generous heart. Her daughter, Amanda, continues to ride Nancy's beloved horse, Montana, keeping her mother's memory alive in the quiet valleys of Paso Robles. The Art of Grief and the Fentanyl Facade. The mountain community of Summit County, Utah, is home to stunning alpine vistas, luxury estates, and quiet, affluent neighborhoods. In this picturesque setting, the lives of Eric and Corey Richens appeared to represent the pinnacle of the American dream. Eric was a highly successful 39-year-old stonemason who owned C&E Masonry, a $1 million business. Corey, his younger wife, was an ambitious real estate agent and property flipper who managed a rapidly growing business. Together with their 3 young sons, they resided in a beautiful home, participated in youth sports, and enjoyed a life of relative luxury. But on the night of March 3rd, 2022, this picture-perfect existence collapsed. At approximately 3 o'clock in the morning, Corey Richens placed a frantic call to 911, reporting that her husband was cold to the touch and not breathing. First responders arrived at the home to find Eric lying on his back on the bedroom floor. Despite prolonged cardiopulmonary resuscitation efforts, Eric was pronounced deceased at 3:58 in the morning. Corey informed the arriving officers that they had been celebrating a major financial achievement earlier that evening. She had recently secured the contract to purchase a massive, unfinished mansion in Midway, Utah, valued at nearly $3 million, a project she believed would elevate her business to new heights. To celebrate, she had prepared a mixed drink, a Moscow Mule, for Eric before bed. She claimed that she then went to sleep in one of her son's bedrooms to comfort him during a night terror, returning to her own bedroom hours later to find her husband lifeless. The sudden death of a healthy, athletic 39-year-old man was deeply shocking. On scene, an emergency medical technician speculated that Eric might have suffered a sudden brain aneurysm. This explanation was initially accepted by Corey's family, but Eric's family harbored immediate, deep suspicions. The tension between Corey and Eric's family erupted almost immediately. 2 days after Eric's passing, a locksmith arrived at the residence to open a safe containing Eric's estate planning documents. Eric's sister, Amy, arrived at the home, and a heated confrontation ensued. Amy asserted that Corey had no legal right to the contents of the safe, leading to a physical altercation in which Amy accused Corey of assault. The police were called, and Corey was subsequently charged with assault, to which she eventually pled no contest. This incident exposed a bitter, hidden truth. Eric Richens had spent the final 2 years of his life quietly protecting his assets from his wife. In 2020, Eric discovered that Corey had taken out a $250,000 line of credit against their family home, a property Eric owned solely without his knowledge or consent. she had also run up significant debt on joint credit cards. Devastated by this breach of trust, Eric consulted with a divorce attorney and estate planner. While he chose to remain in the marriage for the sake of their 3 sons, he secretly restructured his will and trust. He transferred ownership of his business and real estate to a trust managed by his sister, Katie, designating his sons as the sole beneficiaries, effectively cutting Corey out of his estate. As the months passed, Corey portrayed herself to the public as a deeply grieving widow struggling to help her young children navigate the trauma of losing their father. Sensing a void in the market for children's literature on grief, she authored a self-published book titled Are You With Me? The book, which featured a touching dedication to her late husband, was designed to comfort children by assuring them that their deceased parent's spirit remained with them during important milestones. In March of 2023, Corey embarked on a media tour, appearing on local television and radio programs to promote her book. She spoke eloquently about her personal journey with grief, her love for her children, and her desire to help other families. The community embraced her as a resilient, inspiring figure. But behind this compassionate facade, a rigorous criminal investigation was drawing to a close. The state medical examiner's toxicology report had returned with a shocking finding. Eric Richins had not died of an aneurysm. His system contained 5 times the lethal dosage of illicit fentanyl. The drug had been ingested orally, meaning it had entered his stomach shortly before his death. Eric had no history of substance abuse, and investigators found no trace of fentanyl or drug paraphernalia in the home. Under the direction of Detective Jeff O'Driscoll of the Summit County Sheriff's Office, investigators began a deep dive into Corey's communications and financial records. They discovered that Corey's real estate business was in a state of severe financial collapse. She owed over $4 million to more than 20 different lenders, many of whom were hard money lenders charging exorbitant interest rates. She had recently lost the Midway mansion to foreclosure and had defrauded her close friend, Chelsea Barney, out of $45,000 intended as a down payment on a home. The financial motive was clear, but investigators still needed to connect Corey directly to the lethal drug. A private investigator hired by the Richins family analyzed Corey's phone records, identifying frequent communications with a woman named Carmen Lauber. Lauber had worked for Corey's house cleaning and renovation business and possessed a prior history of drug offenses. Detectives executed a search warrant on Lauber's residence, uncovering drug paraphernalia and, tellingly, a copy of Eric Richins' obituary taped to her mirror. Faced with severe drug and weapon charges, Lauber agreed to cooperate with the prosecution. Lauber revealed that Corey had approached her on 2 separate occasions in early 2022, requesting strong pain medication for an investor who had suffered a back injury. Lauber contacted her dealer, Robert Crozier, and purchased hydrocodone pills, which she delivered to Corey. Shortly thereafter, Corey requested something even stronger, specifically asking for Michael Jackson stuff, a common slang for powerful sedatives or fentanyl. Lauber procured 15 to 30 fentanyl pills and left them at a property. Corey was renovating. The timing of these transactions aligned with suspicious incidents in Eric's life. Eric's family recalled that during a trip to Greece in 2019, Eric had become violently ill after consuming a drink prepared by Corey. He had called his sister, expressing fear that his wife had attempted to poison him. More recently, on Valentine's Day of 2022, Corey had purchased a bagel sandwich for Eric from a local diner. After taking a single bite, Eric suffered a severe allergic reaction, requiring the use of his son's epinephrine auto-injector and a large dose of antihistamines before falling into a deep sleep. He texted a friend afterward, writing, "I think my wife tried to poison me." The financial and pharmaceutical evidence was compelling, but investigators uncovered a third motive, a secret romantic affair. Detectives learned that Corey had been engaged in a years-long relationship with a handyman named Josh Grossman. The two had exchanged thousands of text messages expressing deep love and a desire for a future together. In February of 2022, Corey sent Grossman a text message suggesting she would secure millions from a divorce and buy the Midway Mansion, where they could live in the guest house. On March 1st, 2022, just 2 days before Eric's death, Corey sent Grossman a text message that read, "Hang in there until Friday. Life is going to be different, I promise." On May 8th, 2023, Corey Richens was arrested and charged with aggravated murder and possession of controlled substances with the intent to distribute. The news sent shockwaves through the community, turning the beloved grief author into a suspected killer overnight. While held in the Summit County Jail, Corey's penchant for writing proved to be her undoing. During a routine sweep of her cell, deputies discovered a handwritten 4-page letter addressed to her mother. The letter, which the prosecution termed the "walk the dog" letter, contained explicit instructions for her brother, Ronnie, to testify falsely. Corey instructed her mother to tell Ronnie to claim that Eric had obtained pain pills and fentanyl from Mexico through ranch workers, attempting to fabricate an alternative explanation for Eric's overdose. Corey's defense team argued that the letter was merely a draft of a fictional manuscript she was writing. However, the prosecution viewed it as clear evidence of witness tampering. The charges were subsequently amended to include attempted murder for the Valentine's Day incident. The high-profile trial commenced in Summit County. The prosecution presented a meticulous case calling Carmen Lauber, Robert Crozier, and Eric's family members to testify. One of the most emotional moments occurred when Josh Grossman took the stand. He testified about their affair, their shared dreams, and a chilling conversation they had in her car after Eric's death, during which Corey asked if he had ever killed anyone during his military service in Iraq and how it had made him feel. In a dramatic legal maneuver, the defense chose to rest their case without calling a single witness, confident that the prosecution had failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt how the fentanyl had been administered. The jury did not agree. After deliberating for just under 3 hours, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict. Corey Richins was guilty on all counts, including aggravated murder. The verdict brought immense relief to the Richins family, who had endured a year of public scrutiny while Corey portrayed herself as a victim. Eric's 3 sons, who had been removed from Corey's custody under Utah law, were adopted by Eric's sister, ensuring they would grow up surrounded by their father's family and his enduring legacy of love. The firefighter and the deleted call. In the city of Evansville, Indiana, the bond within the local fire department is akin to family. Robert "Robbie" Dorr was a cornerstone of that family. A 28-year veteran of the department, Robbie was a respected captain of Engine 1 known for his bravery, his leadership, and his dedication to training younger firefighters. In his spare time, he worked a second job managing a local restaurant, Taco John's, to provide a comfortable life for his family. Robbie was married to Elizabeth Becky Fox Dorr. The two had been married for only 6 months, a union that represented Elizabeth's 6th marriage. By all outward appearances, they were happy, but beneath the surface, the marriage was plagued by severe financial strain and mutual distrust. On the cold evening of February 26, 2019, Robbie arrived home at his Oakley Street residence after completing a 12-hour shift at the fire station. As his truck pulled into the driveway, a series of gunshots shattered the quiet neighborhood. Elizabeth called 911, screaming that her husband had been shot. First responders, including many of Robbie's fellow firefighters, rushed to the scene. They found Robbie lying on the concrete driveway with gunshot wounds to the head and torso. Despite frantic efforts to administer aid, Robbie succumbed to his injuries. The grief within the Evansville Fire Department was profound. Robbie's body was escorted to the coroner's office by a procession of fire trucks, their lights flashing in silent tribute to a fallen hero. Detectives with the Evansville Police Department immediately began an intensive investigation. They found no shell casings at the scene, suggesting the shooter had used a revolver. A damaged projectile recovered from the driveway was analyzed by ballistics experts, who determined that the weapon used was likely a Taurus Judge, a unique revolver capable of firing both .45 caliber bullets and shotgun shells. When investigators interviewed Elizabeth, she claimed that she had been inside cooking dinner when she saw her husband's headlights in the driveway, followed immediately by the sound of gunfire. She insisted she had no knowledge of who would want to hurt her husband, describing him as a man without enemies. However, a forensic download of Elizabeth's cellular telephone revealed a critical anomaly. There was a deleted phone call on her device from just 5 minutes before her 911 call. While she had erased the record from her phone, the carrier records from Sprint confirmed that she had received a 4-minute and 18-second call from a number she claimed not to recognize. When detectives confronted Elizabeth with the carrier records, she eventually admitted that the call was from Larry Richmond Sr., her sister Mandy's fiancé. The revelation of Larry Richmond Sr.'s involvement immediately shifted the focus of the investigation. Richmond Sr. was a convicted murderer who had recently been released from prison. After serving a 20-year sentence, he was living with Elizabeth's sister, Mandy, just a few streets away from the Dorr residence. Detectives discovered that Richmond Sr. had a son, Larry Richmond Jr., who worked at a local pawn shop. A subsequent investigation revealed that a Taurus Judge revolver had been stolen from the pawn shop shortly before the murder. A photograph recovered from Richmond Jr.'s phone showed the stolen revolver sitting in his father's lap. Furthermore, investigators learned that Elizabeth and Larry Richmond Sr. had been engaged in a secret romantic affair. Richmond Jr. testified that he had witnessed his father and Elizabeth kissing behind the Dorr home. Text messages between the two revealed a deep affection and a shared desire to be together. The timeline of the evening began to take shape. Elizabeth had been in constant communication with Richmond Sr., informing him of Robbie's schedule. On the night of the murder, Robbie was working an unusual shift, picking up extra hours for a colleague. Elizabeth was the only person who knew exactly when Robbie would be returning home. During that deleted 4-minute call, Elizabeth had likely informed Richmond Sr. that her husband's truck was approaching the house. Despite their suspicions, detectives lacked the physical evidence to charge Richmond Sr. with the murder. He was initially arrested on federal weapons charges after his son, Richmond Jr., informed police that his father had buried a cache of firearms in Mandy's backyard. A search of the property uncovered several buried firearms, though the murder weapon was not among them. The breakthrough in the case came from the high-tech crime unit. Richmond Sr. had refused to provide the passcode to his iPhone for months. Forensic investigators utilized specialized computer algorithms to crack the passcode. After nearly 8 months, the device was successfully unlocked. The cellular location data recovered from Richmond Sr.'s phone was devastating. On the night of the murder, his device was tracked slithering around the alleyways immediately behind the Dorr residence during the 6 o'clock hour. His phone was powered off between 6:52 and 7:14, the exact window of the shooting, before being powered back on at a nearby gas station, where surveillance footage showed him wearing a sleeveless t-shirt in the freezing February cold. In August of 2020, Elizabeth Fox Dorr and Larry Richmond Sr. were arrested and charged with murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Elizabeth's trial was heard first. The prosecution presented the deleted phone records, the financial motives, including Elizabeth's immediate inquiries into Robbie's firefighter pension the morning after the murder, and the testimony of her own son, Nathan, who confirmed his mother's obsession with the financial benefits of Robbie's death. Elizabeth maintained her innocence, claiming that her deletion of the phone call was merely a habit and that her relationship with Richmond Sr. was entirely innocent. The jury did not believe her. Following a multi-day trial, Elizabeth Fox Dorr was found guilty of murder and conspiracy to commit murder. She was sentenced to 90 years in prison. Larry Richmond Sr.'s trial followed, despite the defense's arguments that the case was entirely circumstantial and lacked a murder weapon. The pile of digital and testimonial evidence was overwhelming. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Robbie Dorr's memory was honored by the Evansville Fire Department, who dedicated their newest fire truck in his name. His daughter, Lindsay, and son, Nathan, continued to carry his legacy, finding solace in the knowledge that those who betrayed him will spend the rest of their lives behind bars. The false face of the arsonist and the cold pond. The village of Willard, Ohio, is a tight-knit railroad community where generations of families have lived and worked. In October of 2001, the town was gripped by the mysterious disappearance of Regina Roe Hicks. Regina was a vibrant, hard-working 25-year-old mother who had recently separated from her husband, Paul Hicks. The couple's relationship had been highly volatile, characterized by Paul's obsessive need for control. Following a house fire in the summer of 2001, the couple received a $60,000 insurance settlement. Regina utilized her share of the money to secure her independence, purchasing a white Chevrolet Camaro and filing for divorce. On the evening of October 18, 2001, Regina was scheduled to pick up her 4-year-old son, Montana, from Paul at the home of Paul's best friend, Stephen Gates. She never arrived. 4 days later, a local farmer noticed an object submerged in a pond on his property. Sheriff's deputies and a dive team arrived to discover Regina's white Camaro resting at the bottom of the deep pond. Inside, on the passenger side, was the body of Regina Hicks. The forensic analysis of the vehicle and the body yielded chilling clues. Regina's feet were tucked neatly under the passenger side console, a position she could not have naturally assumed had she been driving. The driver's seat was pushed all the way back, indicating a much larger person had been at the wheel. Furthermore, caked mud was found inside the back of her folded jeans and boots, suggesting she had been dragged across the muddy ground before being placed in the car. The autopsy revealed that Regina had suffered 3 blunt force strikes to her scalp, sufficient to incapacitate her, but not to cause her death. The cause of death was determined to be drowning. Water from the pond was discovered in her nasal cavity, proving she was still alive, though unconscious. When the vehicle was driven into the water, Paul Hicks was the prime suspect. He had a powerful motive. He was desperate to avoid paying child support and losing custody of his son. However, Paul provided a solid alibi, claiming that Regina had never arrived at Gates' property and that he had spent the evening waiting for her. With no physical evidence, no eyewitnesses, and no confession, the investigation stalled and the case grew cold. 14 years later, in June of 2015, a massive structure fire broke out at an investment property owned by Paul Hicks in Goshen, Ohio. First responders discovered that the house had been completely destroyed. During the search of the debris, fire investigators crawled over several 5-gallon gas cans, indicating the fire was an act of arson. Paul Hicks immediately pointed the finger at his ex-girlfriend, Kelly. The two had been engaged in a bitter child custody battle. Hicks provided investigators with a digital video recorder system that had been preserved inside a fireproof safe. The surveillance footage showed a man and a woman in Tyvek suits pouring gasoline throughout the home before igniting it. The woman in the video possessed long, curly blonde hair and facial features that bore a striking resemblance to Kelly. Furthermore, Hicks produced a warrant for Kelly's arrest, pointing to a prior incident where a woman matching her description had vandalized his hot tub. Based on this evidence, Kelly was arrested and detained. But as the investigation proceeded, the constructed narrative began to unravel. Zachary McCune, a civil attorney representing Allstate Insurance, began a rigorous investigation into Hicks' claim. Kelly maintained her innocence, providing solid cell phone tower records showing she was miles away at her mother's home during the fire. McCune discovered that the night before the fire, Hicks' phone log showed over 90 incoming calls from Kelly's number. However, Kelly's carrier records showed she had made no such calls. A subpoena to a service called Spoof Card revealed that the calls had actually been generated by a device possessed by Paul Hicks, utilizing software to fake Kelly's caller identification. The investigation took a bizarre turn when McCune analyzed the financial records of a woman who had recently dated Hicks. The records revealed a purchase from a specialty website called That's My Face. The company specialized in creating highly realistic, custom silicone masks based on photographs. The order, placed using photos of Kelly extracted from Hicks' social media, was for a custom mask designed to look exactly like Kelly. Additionally, a purchase for a blonde wig matching Kelly's hairstyle was discovered. The psychological profile of Paul Hicks was deeply disturbing. He had gone to extraordinary lengths to construct a cinematic frame-up, utilizing a custom silicone mask and a wig to have an accomplice portray his ex-girlfriend on his own surveillance cameras, all to secure a child custody advantage and defraud his insurance company. Faced with this evidence, Allstate denied Hicks' claim and countersued him for fraud, resulting in a $400,000 judgment against him. Hicks subsequently pled guilty to insurance fraud and was sentenced to probation. But the exposure of Hicks' elaborate arson scheme had a far more profound consequence. The Bureau of Criminal Investigation in Ohio, recognizing the pattern of extreme control and manipulation, officially reopened the cold case of Regina Hicks' murder. A local podcaster, Ashley Ford, began producing a series of investigative episodes on the case, raising public awareness and placing immense pressure on those who had remained silent for decades. The pressure proved too great for Stephen Gates. In 2024, Gates' attorney contacted special prosecutors indicating his client was ready to tell the truth in exchange for immunity from prosecution for obstruction of justice. Gates' confession shattered the 24-year-old mystery. He revealed that on the night of October 18, 2001, Regina had indeed arrived at his property to pick up Montana. She and Paul immediately began a violent argument in the driveway. Gates, wanting to avoid the conflict, retreated into his garage and turned on a tractor to drown out the noise. When he emerged minutes later, he saw Regina's Camaro parked near the road. Paul was standing by the open passenger door. Gates walked over, looked inside, and saw Regina's unresponsive body crumpled on the floorboard. Paul coldly informed him, "She is dead." Panic-stricken, Gates urged Paul to call 911, but Paul refused, telling Gates, "You're in this now." Paul forced Gates to follow him as he drove Regina's Camaro to the remote pond, where Paul drove the vehicle into the water, leaving his unconscious wife to
drown.
On the drive back, Paul utilized his cellular telephone to place a call to Regina's phone, deliberately creating a false electronic trail to suggest she was still alive. With Gates' detailed testimony and his physical recreation of the crime scene on his property, prosecutors secured an indictment for murder and kidnapping against Paul Hicks. In April of 2025, Paul Hicks was arrested. The trial was a historic event for Huron County. The prosecution presented Gates' devastating eyewitness testimony, the medical examiner's findings regarding the mud and water in Regina's lungs, and the testimony of Hicks' sister, who recalled finding her brother's muddy clothes floating in the bathtub the night of the disappearance. The defense argued that Gates was an admitted liar who had secured an immunity deal to save himself, and highlighted the lack of physical deoxyribonucleic acid linking Hicks to the car. The jury was not swayed by the defense's arguments. After a multi-day trial, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts. Paul Hicks was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. For Regina's family, the verdict was a long-awaited victory. While her mother, Lausella, had passed away from cancer before witnessing justice, her cousins and friends celebrated the memory of a beautiful, strong-willed young mother whose truth had finally been brought to light. Conclusion: the persistence of truth. The 4 cases detailed in this analysis offer profound insights into the criminal mind and the nature of justice. In each instance, the perpetrator believed that they had constructed a flawless facade. Carlo Fuentes Flores relied on his reputation as a polite, harmless laborer. Corey Richens attempted to hide her greed behind the tragic persona of a grieving children's author. Elizabeth Fox Dorr and Larry Richmond Sr. believed that a deleted phone call and a hidden cache of weapons would shield them from scrutiny. Paul Hicks constructed an incredibly complex, high-tech frame-up utilizing a custom silicone mask to escape his past and destroy his enemies. Yet, in every case, the persistent, methodical application of forensic science and investigative dedication dismantled these illusions. whether through the invisible tracking of a Google geofence, the precise analysis of toxicology reports, the recovery of deleted digital data, or the simple weight of a guilty conscience, the truth ultimately prevailed. These stories serve as a powerful reminder of the value of community vigilance and the enduring strength of the families who seek justice. The perpetrators of these crimes now reside behind prison walls, their elaborate facades entirely stripped away, while the memories of Nancy Woodrum, Eric Richens, Robbie Dorr, and Regina Hicks continue to be honored by those who loved them. The triumph of good over evil is not always swift, but as these investigations demonstrate, the pursuit of justice is relentless, and the truth, once uncovered, is absolute. The psychology of deception and the quest for truth. The human mind possesses an extraordinary capacity to construct elaborate labyrinths of deception. In the realm of criminal psychology, we often observe a peculiar phenomenon. The perpetrator of a crime frequently believes they are the smartest person in the room. They design intricate schemes, fabricate complex alibis, and sometimes even write books about the very tragedies they caused. Yet, no matter how carefully they construct their illusions, the truth has a stubborn way of breaking through the cracks. It is not always a single piece of dramatic evidence that shatters a falsehood. More often, it is the meticulous, patient accumulation of details by dedicated investigators, coupled with the inevitable, subtle mistakes made by the perpetrators themselves. To understand the criminal mind, one must look past the external presentation of normalcy. The neighbor who cleans the house and cooks a quiet dinner, the grieving business owner promoting a book on coping with loss, the successful contractor, the polite painter who volunteers at church. These individuals often wear masks of profound domesticity. Behind these masks, however, lies a different reality, one governed by control, greed, and an inability to accept the consequences of their actions. Through 4 distinct cases, we will explore the anatomy of these deceptions, the psychological vulnerabilities that led to their undoing, and the tireless efforts of those who work to restore justice to the victims and their families. The firefighter and the deleted call. In the city of Evansville, Indiana, the community regarded its first responders with deep respect. Among them, Robert Dorr was a figure of quiet strength and dedication. For 28 years, he had served as a leader within the fire department, training rookie firefighters and instilling in them the legacy of integrity upon which the department was built. To make extra money for his family, Robert also worked a second job as a manager at a local restaurant, Taco John's. It was there that he had met Elizabeth, known to many as Becky, a woman who had been married 5 times before and was seeking a life of consistency. Their relationship began with warmth, and Robert was elated to step into the role of a father for Elizabeth's 3 children. They were married in a beautiful beachside ceremony in Florida. For a brief period of 6 months, they seemed to have found the stability they both desired. But beneath the surface of This newly constructed household, financial and emotional strains were beginning to develop. Robert worked 12-hour shifts, borrowing heavily to fund a lifestyle of brand new vehicles and home furnishings. Trust, too, began to erode. Robert, who had experienced infidelity in a previous relationship, started to notice that Elizabeth was highly protective of her cellular telephone, frequently deleting her text messages and call logs. On a cold night in Evansville, Robert pulled into his driveway after finishing a long shift at the fire department. His headlights illuminated the driveway, a sight Elizabeth claimed to have seen from the kitchen window while preparing a dinner of pork chops and macaroni and cheese. Within a minute, the quiet of the neighborhood was shattered by the sound of 4 or 5 gunshots. Neighbors immediately called 911, reporting the gunfire. Elizabeth also placed a call to the emergency services, her voice frantic as she described finding her husband lying on the concrete, bleeding from a gunshot wound to the head. When the police and medical personnel arrived, Robert still had a pulse, but his injuries were fatal. He was pronounced deceased at the scene. The news of his murder sent shockwaves through Evansville. Firefighters gathered at the crime scene, their grief and anger palpable as they realized they had lost one of their own. The investigation began immediately, but the scene itself offered very little physical evidence. The detectives found no shell casings, only a single damaged projectile in the roadway. As investigators began to reconstruct Robert's life, they discovered a handwritten note from Robert to Elizabeth, detailing his suspicions of infidelity and the growing distance between them. Elizabeth maintained that she had no knowledge of any affair and that her marriage had been stable. However, the digital footprint of her cellular telephone told a different story. Meticulous analysis of the records provided by the service provider, Sprint, revealed a telephone call that had occurred just 5 minutes before Robert was killed. This call had been completely deleted from Elizabeth's physical device, but it remained etched in the company's database. When confronted with this discrepancy in the interview room, Elizabeth initially denied any memory of the call. The detectives, utilizing patient and persistent questioning, pushed past her deflections. Finally, she admitted that she had deleted the call because the person on the other end was Larry Richmond Sr., the fiancé of her sister, Amanda. Elizabeth claimed she deleted the record simply to avoid any suspicion of an affair, maintaining that her connection with Larry was strictly platonic. The introduction of Larry Richmond Sr. into the investigation altered its trajectory. A search of his background revealed a deeply troubling history. At the age of 17, Larry had pled guilty to knowingly killing a person and had served 20 years in prison. He had been out of prison for only a year and a half when Robert was murdered. To the family who had welcomed him to Thanksgiving dinner without knowing his past, this revelation was horrifying. The forensic evidence began to align. The autopsy of Robert Dorr revealed that he had been shot with a mixture of ammunition, including jacketed projectiles. ball projectiles and plastic wadding. A firearms expert identified the weapon. Likely used as a tourist judge, a unique revolver capable of firing both traditional bullets and shotgun shells from the same barrel. Investigators discovered that a tourist judge had been stolen from a local pawn shop, River City Pawn, where Larry Richmond Sr.'s son, Larry Richmond Jr., worked. The younger Larry had even sent photographs of himself posing with the weapon to his friends. As the pressure mounted, Larry Richmond Jr. approached the detectives, revealing that his father had buried a plastic container filled with firearms in the backyard of the residence he shared with Amanda. Surveillance footage from a neighboring home confirmed this, showing Larry Sr. carrying a box into the yard in the evening. A subsequent search of the property led to the recovery of several firearms from a fire pit, though the murder weapon itself was never found. The psychological profile of the perpetrators suggested a highly manipulative dynamic. Elizabeth's immediate inquiry into Robert's fire department pension and life insurance policies on the day after his murder raised significant warning signs for investigators. The prosecution built a case of conspiracy to commit murder, arguing that Elizabeth had communicated Robert's expected arrival time to Larry Sr., who then waited in the darkness to execute him. In the courtroom, the testimony of Elizabeth's oldest son, Nathan, was devastating. He confirmed that his mother had repeatedly asked about the pension and financial benefits immediately after Robert's death. Furthermore, Larry Richmond Jr. testified that he had witnessed his father and Elizabeth sharing a mutual kiss behind the family home, shattering the defense's assertion that there was no romantic relationship between them. The jury deliberated for more than 4 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on charges of murder and conspiracy to commit murder against Elizabeth Foxdor. She was subsequently sentenced to 90 years in prison. Larry Richmond Sr. was also tried, found guilty of murder, and sentenced to life in prison. Through the collaboration of digital forensics, ballistics analysis, and the courage of family members who refused to ignore their instincts, the memory of a dedicated firefighter was honored, and those who conspired to take his life were held accountable. The Mask of Deception and the Cold Pond. The quiet suburb of Goshen, Ohio, near Cincinnati, was woke in the early hours of the morning by a roaring fire. At approximately 1:35 in the morning, emergency services received reports of a severe structure fire at a home owned by Paul Hicks, a railroad foreman who worked for the CSX company. When the firefighters arrived, they found flames pouring from every window and door. The intensity of the blaze suggested an accelerant had been used. As the crew searched the burning home, they crawled over 2 5-gallon gasoline cans left inside the residence. This immediate evidence of arson prompted the dispatch of the state's arson investigation unit and the Claremont County Sheriff's Office. Paul Hicks, who was staying at a hotel in Bluffton, Ohio, due to his work, returned to the scene and assisted investigators in retrieving his home surveillance system's digital video recorder, which had survived the fire inside 2 fireproof safes. The footage from the surveillance system was remarkably clear. It captured 2 individuals dressed in white protective suits walking up to the home at approximately 1:15 in the morning. The male suspect carried gasoline cans, while the female suspect, who possessed long, curly blonde hair, was seen carrying a television out of the residence before the building was set ablaze. Paul Hicks immediately identified the female suspect as his ex-girlfriend, Kelly, with whom he was engaged in a bitter child custody dispute. He claimed she had been harassing him, pointing to over 90 phone calls received on his phone the night of the fire, as well as a prior incident where she had allegedly damaged his hot tub. Based on Paul's identification and the apparent mountain of evidence, Kelly was arrested. However, as the investigators dug deeper, the narrative began to unravel. Kelly was cooperative, providing a voluntary statement and consenting to a search of her records. A detailed review of her actual cellular telephone logs revealed that she had made only 5 calls to Paul that night, entirely contradicting the 90-some calls displayed on his phone's incoming log. Zachary McCune, a civil attorney representing the insurance company, emerged as a key investigator in the case. He realized that the discrepancy in the phone logs could be explained by a service called Spoof Card, which allows a user to disguise their phone number on a caller ID by subpoenaing the records of the spoofing service. Investigators traced the calls back to an IP address associated with a prepaid telephone in the possession of Paul Hicks himself. The investigation into the identity of the blonde woman in the video led to a stunning discovery. Investigators found that a credit card associated with a woman Paul had previously dated had been used to purchase a highly specific wig from a specialty store, as well as a custom-made rubber mask from a website called That's My Face. The mask had been created using photographs of Kelly's face, which were recovered from Paul's social media accounts. The perpetrator had gone to the extraordinary length of purchasing a mask of his ex-girlfriend's face to wear during the arson, intending to frame her for the crime and secure sole custody of their son. Faced with this overwhelming evidence of fraud, the insurance company denied the claim, and Paul Hicks eventually pleaded guilty to insurance fraud, receiving a sentence of probation. But this investigation caught the attention of authorities in Huron County, Ohio, more than 100 miles away. They had been holding a cold case file since 2001, the unsolved homicide of Paul's first wife, Regina Roe Hicks. Regina was described by her friends and family as a vibrant, independent young woman who loved country music and her 4-year-old son, Montana. In the summer of 2001, a suspicious fire had destroyed the home she shared with Paul. Following a $60,000 insurance settlement, Regina chose to separate from Paul, purchasing a white Camaro and seeking her independence. She filed for divorce and began dating another man. On a crisp October evening in 2001, Regina was scheduled to pick up Montana from Paul at the property of his best friend, Stephen Gates. She never arrived to pick up her son, nor did she meet her boyfriend as planned. For days. Later, a local farmer discovered her white Camaro submerged in a deep pond on his property. When the vehicle was recovered, investigators made several critical observations. Regina's body was located on the passenger side of the vehicle, with her feet caked in mud and positioned underneath the dashboard. The driver's seat was pushed all the way back, indicating a much taller person had been driving, and the vehicle's transmission was stuck in second gear. The autopsy revealed 3 blunt force strikes to Regina's scalp, which had incapacitated her, and the presence of fluid in her lungs confirmed that she had been alive, but unconscious when the vehicle was driven into the pond, causing her to drown. The case remained cold for over 2 decades, despite the efforts of Regina's mother, Losella, who fought for justice until her death from cancer. The breakthrough came when a local podcaster, Ashley Ford, began reviewing the case files, focusing on the inconsistencies in the statements of Paul's best friend, Stephen Gates. Behind the scenes, the Bureau of Criminal Investigation was also mounting a renewed effort, preparing to re-interview key witnesses. Faced with the prospect of prosecution, Stephen Gates sought an immunity agreement through his attorney. Once the agreement was secured, Gates confessed to the truth of that night. He revealed that Regina had indeed arrived at his property to pick up her son, where she and Paul engaged in a violent argument. Gates claimed he went into his garage to work on his tractor, turning up the radio to drown out the noise. When he emerged, he saw Regina's body slumped in the passenger seat of her Camaro. Paul told him she was dead and warned Gates that he was now involved. Gates admitted to following Paul, who drove the Camaro into the pond, leaving Regina to drown. On the drive back, Paul used his cellular telephone to call Regina's phone, attempting to create a false digital alibi. Gates subsequently walked investigators through his property, demonstrating exactly where the altercation had occurred. Armed with this confession, authorities arrested Paul Hicks and charged him with murder and kidnapping. At trial, the prosecution presented a compelling case built on circumstantial evidence, the testimony of Stephen Gates, and the physical anomalies of the vehicle. Paul's sister testified that on the night of the disappearance, she had returned home early to find Paul's muddy clothing floating in the bathtub and Paul possessing deep scratches on his face. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before finding Paul Hicks guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. For Kelly, who had spent years fighting for her son in family court under the shadow of false accusations, the verdict brought profound relief. For Regina's surviving family, it was the fulfillment of a promise made to a mother who had never stopped searching for the truth. The grief author and the lethal cup. In the scenic mountain community of Summit County, Utah, Corey Richens presented herself as a model of success and resilience. A mother of 3 young boys, she ran a growing real estate flipping business, purchasing distressed properties and renovating them for substantial profits. When her 39-year-old husband, Eric, died unexpectedly in March of 2022, Corey channeled her grief into writing. She self-published a children's book titled, Are You With Me?, designed to help children cope with the loss of a parent. She appeared on local television and radio programs, offering comfort to other grieving families and projecting the image of a devastated yet strong widow. However, behind the scenes of her media appearances, a far more sinister reality was taking shape. In the early hours of March 4th, 2022, Corey had called 911, stating that her husband was cold to the touch and not breathing. Emergency responders arrived to find Eric deceased on the floor of the bedroom, while an initial theory of an aneurysm was floated by a paramedic due to the presence of blood. The subsequent toxicology report revealed a shocking truth. Eric had died from an oral overdose of illicitly manufactured fentanyl, possessing 5 times the lethal dosage in his system. Eric was a highly athletic, active man who did not use illicit drugs. His family was immediately suspicious of Corey, pointing to a history of financial deception. Investigators discovered that Corey was drowning in millions of dollars of debt, funded by high-interest hard money loans. Without Eric's knowledge, she had forged his signature to secure a $250,000 line of credit against their family home. When Eric discovered this, he secretly altered his estate planning, placing his assets, his business, and the home into a trust managed by his sister, Katie, effectively cutting Corey out of his will. As the financial pressure mounted, Corey became desperate to acquire Eric's assets, particularly to fund the purchase of a grand, unfinished mansion in Midway, Utah, which she hoped to flip for a massive profit. Her financial desperation had already claimed victims. She had defrauded her close friend, Chelsea Barney, of $45,000 intended for a home purchase, resulting in Chelsea's eviction and financial ruin. The investigation revealed that Corey's attempts to harm Eric had begun long before his fatal overdose. During a trip to Greece in 2019, Eric had become violently ill after drinking a beverage served by Corey, prompting him to call his sister and express his fear that his wife was trying to poison him. On Valentine's Day of 2022, Corey purchased a toasted bagel sandwich for Eric from a local diner. After taking a single bite, Eric suffered a severe reaction, requiring the use of his son's epinephrine auto-injector and a heavy dose of antihistamines. He texted a friend afterward, writing that he believed his wife had tried to poison him. The breakthrough in the case came through the analysis of cellular telephone records. A private investigator hired by the Richens family identified frequent communication between Corey and a woman named Carmen Lauber, a house cleaner with a history of drug convictions. Detective Jeff O'Driscoll of the Summit County Sheriff's Office executed a search warrant on Carmen's home, discovering drug paraphernalia and, tellingly, a copy of Eric's obituary taped to a mirror. Faced with prosecution, Carmen cooperated with authorities. She admitted that Corey had asked her to procure strong pain medication for an investor, specifically requesting some of that Michael Jackson stuff. Carmen purchased 30 fentanyl pills from a local dealer, Robert Crozier, and delivered them to
Corey.
A short time later, Corey requested a second, stronger batch of pills, which was delivered just days before Eric's death. The timing of these transactions aligned perfectly with the text messages exchanged between Corey and Carmen on Valentine's Day and the days leading up to March 4th. While in custody awaiting trial, Corey's attempts at manipulation continued. During a search of her jail cell, officers discovered a 4-page handwritten letter titled, "Walk the Dog." The letter, addressed to her mother, contained detailed instructions for her brother, Ronnie, to fabricate a story claiming that Eric had traveled to Mexico to purchase pain pills and fentanyl from ranch workers. The prosecution presented this letter as clear evidence of witness tampering. Furthermore, investigators uncovered a secret relationship between Corey and a handyman, Josh Grossman, with whom she had been exchanging highly romantic text messages for years. In one text sent just 48 hours before Eric's death, Corey urged Grossman to hang in until Friday, promising that life would soon be different. At the trial in Summit County, the prosecution presented a powerful case, detailing the financial motives, the drug purchases, and the secret affair. Carmen Lauber took the stand, emotional but clear, describing her role in procuring the lethal pills. Josh Grossman also testified, breaking down as his private messages with Corey were displayed on the screen. He revealed a chilling conversation that occurred after Eric's death, where Corey asked him if he had ever killed anyone during his military service and how it made him feel. In a dramatic move, the defense team, led by public defenders Kathy Nestor and Wendy Lewis, rested their case without calling a single witness, believing the state had not met the burden of proof. However, the jury was unpersuaded. After less than 3 hours of deliberation, they returned a verdict of guilty on all counts, including aggravated murder and insurance fraud. Corey Richins, the author who had written a book about coping with her husband's death, was unmasked as the architect of his murder. The Passage of the Oaks and the Silent Geophants. Paso Robles, California, is a region of stunning beauty characterized by rolling hills, expansive vineyards, and majestic oak trees. Within this idyllic landscape, 62-year-old Nancy Woodrum lived a quiet, peaceful life on her secluded property, Paradise Ranch. A beloved local figure, Nancy ran a popular hair salon downtown and was a devout Jehovah's Witness, known for her kindness, generosity, and strong faith. On a weekend in May of 2018, a large group of wedding guests checked into the main house at Paradise Ranch for a celebration at a local winery. Nancy was staying in her nearby cottage on the property.
On Saturday
morning, Nancy's daughter, Amanda, became concerned when her mother failed to appear for a scheduled Bible study. Amanda's husband went to check on Nancy and found the front door of her cottage wide open, the television blaring, and no sign of Nancy. Inside the cottage, the scene was chilling. Investigators found 2 large blood stains on the floor, blood spatter on the headboard and walls, and a bloody handprint on a pillow. Nancy's purse, keys, cellular telephone, and vehicles were all left behind. It was immediately apparent that she had been subjected to a violent assault and taken against her will. That evening, a California Highway Patrol officer discovered several items of bedding and clothing discarded on the side of a rural road 6 miles from the property. Amanda confirmed that the items, which were stained with blood, belonged to her mother. The search for Nancy intensified, involving helicopters, search and rescue teams, and local volunteers, but the vast and rugged terrain yielded no further clues. Initially, investigators focused on the wedding guests staying at Paradise Ranch, as well as a general contractor, Sean Bloom, who had recently been fired by Nancy after a contentious dispute over home repairs. However, DNA testing of the bloody pillow and the voluntary cooperation of the suspects quickly cleared them of any involvement. The case began to stall, with no eyewitnesses and no obvious leads. Determined to find answers, the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office decided to employ a highly advanced investigative tool, a Google geofence warrant, by establishing a virtual boundary around Nancy's property and requesting data for the specific time frame of her disappearance. Investigators hoped to identify any cellular devices active at the scene. This technique was guided by a critical piece of evidence. Nancy's phone records showed an attempted 911 call at 12:17 in the morning, which had been instantly disconnected. The geofence data returned a single, highly suspicious device active in Nancy's studio at 1:33 and 1:52 in the morning. A subsequent warrant for the subscriber information revealed the device belonged to Carlo Fuentes Flores, a quiet, polite painter who had been working on Nancy's property to prepare it for sale. Carlo had been interviewed early in the investigation and had appeared mild-mannered and cooperative. He had no criminal record in the United States or Mexico and was regarded by his employer as a dedicated professional and father. However, a deeper analysis of his digital footprint revealed a dark, hidden life. His search history was filled with queries for older women and explicit videos, as well as searches for local escorts. He had also recorded numerous videos of himself engaging in sexual encounters with various women. Investigators placed Carlo under surveillance and successfully recovered a plastic bottle he had discarded at a local restaurant. The DNA from the bottle matched the unknown male DNA found within the bloody handprint on Nancy's pillow. Armed with this conclusive forensic link, detectives brought Carlo in for questioning. During the interrogation, Carlo initially claimed that he had returned to the property in the middle of the night to retrieve a ladder and had accidentally struck Nancy with his vehicle. He claimed he brought her inside to help her, but she collapsed. However, as the detectives confronted him with the physical evidence of the blood spatter and the geofence data, his narrative crumbled. Carlo broke down and confessed to the full truth. He admitted that he had traveled to the property with the intention of sexually assaulting Nancy. He entered her cottage while she was sleeping, assaulted her, and then wrapped her in her bedding. Realizing the severity of his actions and wanting to avoid detection, he drove her to a highly remote area of the Carrizo Plain where he suffocated her with a pillow and left her body in the brush, covering her remains with a pile of rocks. Carlo felt his knees in the interrogation room, crying and offering to lead investigators to Nancy's remains. He guided them on an hour-long drive into the desert, eventually pointing out the small circle of rocks where Nancy's skull and skeletal remains were recovered. In January of 2022, rather than face a lengthy trial, Carlo Fuentes Flores entered a slow plea, allowing the judge to review the evidence and find him guilty of first-degree murder with the special circumstance of rape. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Through the innovative use of digital geofencing, patient surveillance, and forensic science, a mother's final resting place was found, and a dangerous predator was permanently removed from the community. The triumph of justice. These 4 cases, spanning different regions and decades, reveal the complex nature of criminal psychology. In each instance, the perpetrators believed they could escape detection by manipulating the narrative, fabricating evidence, or relying on the passage of time. Elizabeth Foxdor believed a deleted call would hide her conspiracy. Paul Hicks believed a custom rubber mask and a faked phone log would frame his ex-girlfriend and conceal a 20-year-old murder. Corey Richins believed her public persona as a grieving author would shield her from the consequences of a lethal poisoning, and Carlo Fuentes Flores believed the remoteness of his crime would keep his dark secrets buried forever. Yet, in every case, justice prevailed. The resolution of these tragedies was not the result of fortune, but of the relentless, systematic work of law enforcement. Officers, forensic scientists, prosecutors, and vigilant citizens. By honoring the memory of the victims, Robert Dorr, Regina Rowe Hicks, Eric Richins, and Nancy Woodrum, and by refusing to allow their stories to be forgotten, these communities demonstrated the enduring triumph of truth over deception and good over evil. The human mind possesses an extraordinary capacity for compartmentalization. In the quiet corners of our communities, individuals carry out their daily routines, exchange warm greetings, and project an image of effortless normalcy, while harboring secrets of profound darkness. For a detective or a criminal psychologist, the challenge lies not just in gathering physical clues, but in piercing these carefully constructed facades to uncover the psychological truths beneath. The 4 cases examined here, spanning different landscapes from the oak-studded valleys of California to the mountain peaks of Utah, the quiet neighborhoods of Indiana, and the rural farmlands of Ohio, illustrate a singular reality. No matter how meticulously a crime is planned, and no matter how complex the deception, the truth eventually finds its way to the surface through the relentless work of investigators and the modern marvels of forensic science. To understand the nature of these crimes, we must first travel to the scenic getaway town of Paso Robles, California. Nestled halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles, it is a region of rolling hills, ancient oak trees, and sprawling vineyards. It is a place that feels almost fairy tale-like, where visitors come to escape the frantic pace of city life. Yet, down a secluded path, known as El Faro Road, an event took place that shattered this peaceful illusion. The property was known as Paradise Ranch, a beautiful ranch-style estate, featuring a 2-story Victorian home with wraparound porches, shaded by a majestic willow tree. The owner was Nancy Woodrum, a 62-year-old woman, who was a beloved fixture in the local community. She ran a popular salon downtown called The Strand, where she was known for her warmth, openness, and generous spirit. Nancy lived alone after her husband passed away, and she had recently decided to sell the property so she could devote her time fully to her faith as one of the Jehovah's Witnesses. To prepare the estate for sale, she had turned the main house into a vacation rental, and on a Friday in early May of 2018, a wedding party of more than 20 guests checked in for a weekend celebration. The weekend began with joy and laughter, but by Saturday morning, a cold dread began to settle over those close to Nancy. Her daughter, Amanda, received a concerning phone call informing her that Nancy had failed to show up for a scheduled Bible study. This was entirely uncharacteristic of her mother. Sensing that something was wrong, Amanda asked a neighbor to check the cottage where Nancy resided on the property. The neighbor's report was chilling. The front door was wide open. The television was blaring, but Nancy was nowhere to be found. When Amanda arrived at her mother's apartment, she was met with a scene that confirmed her worst fears. Nancy's purse, car keys, cellular phone, and electronic tablet computer were all left on a bench, and her 2 vehicles remained parked outside. But there was a large stain on the carpet, and the bedding from her bed was entirely missing. On closer inspection, there appeared to be blood spatter on the walls and furniture. Frantic and shaking, Amanda dialed 911. The house quickly turned into a taped-off crime scene as emergency responders, tracking dogs, and helicopters descended upon Paradise Ranch. Among the first investigators to arrive was Clinton Cole, a senior deputy with the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office. Walking into the cottage, he immediately recognized the signs of a struggle. There were 2 large bloodstains on the floor, blood on a beige pillow, and spatter on the headboard and the back wall. The open door and the absence of forced entry suggested that the intruder had either surprised Nancy in her sleep or was someone she recognized. Deputy Cole felt a heavy certainty that Nancy had been taken against her will, and a desperate search began. That Saturday evening, a critical discovery was made 6 or 7 miles away on
La Ponza Road.
An alert officer with the California Highway Patrol located several items discarded on the side of the road, including a pillow, a dress, a pair of shorts, a shirt, and bedding with a gingham pattern that matched the remaining linens in Nancy's cottage. Some of these items bore significant bloodstains. When shown these pieces of evidence, Amanda confirmed they belonged to her mother. The realization that Nancy had been wrapped in her own bedding and transported away, severely injured or deceased, cast a grim shadow over the investigation. The immediate challenge for the detectives was the sheer size of the potential suspect pool. With more than 20 wedding guests staying on the property, the
scene was chaotic.
The bride, who was staying in the guest house right next to Nancy's cottage, separated by only a single wall, reported hearing absolutely nothing. She had gone to bed around 11:15 in the evening, inserting earplugs to sleep. The wedding party had returned from their rehearsal dinner at 10:30 that night and was asleep by midnight. One particular wedding guest raised eyebrows when he could not initially be accounted for at the rehearsal dinner. He had remained at the property alone, and when questioned, his cooperative attitude quickly soured into resistance. Detectives visited his home in Northern California to obtain a clear timeline and a sample of his deoxyribonucleic acid. However, his wife was able to produce photographs proving he had indeed attended the rehearsal dinner, and his genetic sample was later cleared. Investigators also examined the contractors who had been working on the property. One general contractor, Sean Bloom, had recently engaged in a heated dispute with Nancy over his work and had been fired before receiving payment. This contentious relationship made him a prime person of interest.
When
approached, Bloom openly admitted his dislike for Nancy and initially refused to provide a genetic sample without consulting his attorney. He eventually cooperated, and his genetic profile did not match the evidence. A third avenue of investigation led to Nancy's estranged son, Chad. Their relationship had been deeply strained due to personal differences, and they had not spoken face-to-face in 5 years. However, records showed they had exchanged text messages on the night of her disappearance. Chad was highly distrustful of law enforcement and refused to provide his genetic material. Under surveillance, investigators watched him consume several beverages at a local establishment, and when he was subsequently stopped for a driving violation, the discarded containers were collected and analyzed. His genetic code, too, was cleared. As the weeks turned into months, the investigation seemed to stall.
It was
during this period of frustration that the detectives decided to employ a relatively new investigative tool, a Google geofence search warrant.
By
establishing a virtual boundary around Nancy's secluded property, investigators asked the technology company to identify any cellular devices that had active location services enabled within that specific area during the critical hours of her disappearance. The timing was guided by a crucial piece of data. Nancy's phone bill showed an Attempted 911 call at 12:17 in the morning on Saturday, May 5th, which had been abruptly terminated after 0 seconds. This suggested that the assailant had interrupted her call in a split second. When the geofence data returned, it revealed a device pinging inside Nancy's studio apartment at 1:33 and 1:52 in the morning. When investigators obtained a subsequent warrant for the subscriber information of that device, they were stunned by the name that appeared: Carlo Fuentes Flores. Carlo was a local painter who had been hired to work on the decks of the main house. When investigators had interviewed him months earlier, he had been exceedingly polite and cooperative, showing no signs of malice. He was a father, a husband, and by all outward appearances, an ordinary man earning an honest living. Yet, when detectives began a deep dive into his digital footprint, a much different psychological profile emerged. His search history was filled with explicit queries for older women and escorts, and his device contained numerous